face, carry me away. Carry me away, lift me from this place, ease my burdens, Lord. Take me to your world, let me see your face, carry me away. Carry me away, lift me from this place, ease my burdens, Lord. Take me to your world, let me see your face, carry me away.
Hello and welcome to another SDA Q&A. My very special guests, Robert Wolfgramm and Lowell Tarling. Great to have you guys here.
Hello.
Thank you,
Well,
Peter.
and sorry for the delay coming on, everybody. It's so good to just log in and all of a sudden, boom, there's an audience there. That's great to see. It shows that there's a lot of interest in this topic that we've been talking about. In season 5, I'm dedicating every now and again an episode to converse with people that were there and remember the 70s, and particularly the SDA 70s gospel revival. And I've got 2 guys here who were smack bang in the middle of it and contributed creatively to that whole era, and the sounds of that era continue to resonate within the Adventist Church positively to this day. So thanks for joining me, guys. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Hey, I wanted to quickly share my first memories of both of you. It was from this album here, All My Friends Are Sinners. And,
well, it could have been worse.
And I used to pore over the back cover there, wondering who these guys were. Now, I think it was released in 1978.
It was, Peter.
Yeah. And I got a copy. Oh, and a cassette.
It was also released on cassette, which I've kept.
That's fantastic.
Little collectible.
Yes, I've got a couple of vinyls out there as well. Now the album got into my hands as a vinyl record when myself, Mark Menzies, and Brett Ellum would jam in the Menzies music basement, and of course David Menzies, who you guys would remember, he got us onto this. He said, "You must listen to this album." And so look, we absolutely loved it. Couldn't believe the quality of it, the songwriting. It was just, fresh relief to our ears. So so thank you both for producing this music. We'll just drop straight into there. Tell us some of your memories of recording that album and what you both were doing with getting it off the ground.
Go, Lowell.
Well, I don't know what to say because I didn't enjoy being in the studio. I had
Mm.
nothing to do with the arranging, so the whole thing didn't have a lot to do with me. The writing of it did, but the studio, which was the question, I think that's your question, Robert.
But even lyrically, like leading up to the recording, you both would have been jamming together, writing songs. Tell us a little bit about what that looked like. The you two getting together. Would Bob sort of get his acoustic out, and you'd both be writing lyrics? What was the process there?
Well, first, Lowell got his acoustic out in high school, Peter. In the late 60s, he was a leader of acoustic guitar, folk rock, rockabilly. Well, correct me if my impressions and memories are not as crystal clear as they should be. But he stood out at Strathfield Adventist High School in 1965, 66, 67. Those were the 3 years I was there. And I was, fresh off the boat, as they say. I'd only been in Australia a year and a bit. And here was all this music, pop music. British invasion had started. Beatles had conquered America. They'd come to Australia in 64 and so on and so forth. So where could you get this music? How could you access it? Because, as you would remember, Adventist culture at that time was pretty conservative, but no more than Christian evangelical stroke fundamentalist culture worldwide. We were part of the same, if it's got a beat, it must be dangerous.
Yeah.
Not just Christians. It was because I grew up in London, and I remember when rock music came out, and people were shocked. Not Adventists, not Presbyterian, just people.
Just in the community.
And my parents didn't dislike the music because of Adventism. They disliked the music because they thought Little Richard couldn't possibly be a Seventh-day Adventist.
The greatest rock and roll artist of all time turns out was an Adventist to his dying day. To his dying day.
But at lunchtimes, I followed Lowell around the playground, around the school classrooms, where he would hold court with other like-minded Adventist kids at the time. Louis Rayo was one, and there's a few other names there I've forgotten, but they'd get out their songbooks, and it's the first time I'd seen this as a cultural thing. Wow, you can collect songs in a book and have them so that you've got words, and there are those chord letters, and they tell you what to play on your little acoustic guitar, and you could sing and be Eric Burden or Simon and Garfunkel or John Lennon or whoever, Mick Jagger, and that was lunchtime entertainment for me. I didn't own a guitar. I didn't own a ukulele. I was just a wide-eyed kid. I think
who played tuba.
That's right. I was in the Sydney Adventist Brass Band, which is where I learnt my music as a 13-year-old, and had been there for a year. And so I knew music as notes on pages before I really got into pop music. And Lowell was the main boy, actually, who was leading the lunchtime cult of of groovy guys, and it was great fun. It was great fun because I used to watch their chords and think, oh, okay, there, D, G, A, all the open chords. And Peter, yourself,
it's the time-honored pathway to learning, isn't it? You hang out with other people that have got a bit more knowledge than you, and then you you grapple with it, and it's learning on the go, on the street, not
Yes,
not in
yes.
the classroom.
I never
Well,
really, I never really improved from those. It's the same chords. I never.
Your pinnacle of musicianship was in year 10, was it?
Well, I didn't see the guitar as a musical instrument. I think I saw it as some sort of weapon, you know. And I don't think that's changed really.
Well, Bob Dylan was a bit like that, wasn't it? It was a way to just carry the words and the melodies.
Well, I remember. See, I learned guitar because of my cousin Stuart Walker.
Now, Stuart has just written on the wall, so I'm just going to bring up a message. Stuart Walker Stuart's watching, and he just wrote this: "The school toilets were the best echo chambers."
Well, hello, Stuart. But anyway,
now
so
Stuart
taught me guitar and he used to actually. He was the first person I'd seen play guitar in a church, and he used to sing ballads and so on. And then he taught me guitar. But I remember one day he said to me that there was this instrument, and it was an electric guitar, and you could actually make it bark like a dog. And I just thought, what is this?
Yeah.
What am I doing playing piano, Beethoven, you know, give up piano and get onto this bark like a dog, you know.
Isn't it interesting? Like it's listening to you guys is exactly the way myself and Mark Menzies and Brett Ellen were learning music. But it's interesting that we had to draw it from the secular realm. And so we were into Hendrix and the Beatles and the Stones and Bob Dylan and all those artists, and we're loving. I remember watching a documentary when I was about 11. Hendrix must have just died, and they were showing some footage of him live at Berkeley. And you talk about barking, and he was making it sound like a cow being brutally put to sleep, and
that's what you want.
Taking off, and I was just aghast. What? But it was just so magical. Isn't it interesting that we then tried to bring the elements that we saw in the secular realm into the gospel context that we were in? Were you guys at the time? So we would be trying to find rock music. Obviously, wasn't in the Adventist church, but we would find it in bands like the Resurrection Band and was it Chuck Girard and
my picture's
Larry Norman, these guys.
My picture's frozen, Peter.
We can still see you moving, so hopefully it's just your end. Yeah.
Oh well. Oh, okay.
It'll hopefully free up. So these guys, we found these different artists, as I said, like Larry Norman and Chuck Girard, Tom Howard, all these guys. The Res Band were great. I remember them. Were you also looking into Christian contemporary music at the time, or was it all sourced from the secular realm and then you brought it into your own gospel interpretation?
Well, see, everything we've said is secular. I didn't think about gospel music until meeting up with Robert at Avondale in 1971. And then we reconnected. It was a bit different. He wasn't a little kid, 15-year-old. And then, I don't know, we liked each other's creative things. And then we went back to my room, and then kind of both of us, it's one of those, what have you got moments? What have you got, Robert? What have you got, Lowell? I'd had a stand at the Domain, so I wasn't interested in Christianity at all. I was preaching nothing and, all that stuff and reading poems. And so I did all that stuff. And then Robert said, well, give me the guitar, and he played me Peter's song. And he started jumping around the room. He started going, gaddy-da-dee, gaddy-da-da, gaddy-da-dee. And, jumping around always impresses me. But I never... So what Robert had done over those missing years was it actually combined Christian music with secular, which was new to me.
And so,
Larry
Rob,
came later. You know, this is early seven. This
yeah.
is 71.
So you basically continued exploring the secular realm. Robert, were you gaining an influence from some of the contemporary artists coming out of America that I was just mentioning earlier?
Later, I did.
But your initial run, like by the time you'd written Peter's song, you'd mainly just been drawing influence from the secular world and brought it into your own influence, your own faith.
Because, yes, Peter, because I'd heard singles in the charts, which surprised me, like Oh Happy Day by the Edwin Hawkins singers in the late 60s. Jesus is a Soul Man by Lawrence Reynolds.
Right.
Even the Beatles' Let It Be, I thought, was a kind of gospel song. He Ain't Heavy, He's My Brother by, who's that by?
I remember
Hollies.
it very well. That
The Hollies, sorry, yeah. So there were these, that's the way God planned it, Billy Preston. There were these oddities that, you know, like blips in the radar that I went, oh, so there is room for people who have a something spiritual. And
In the presence of the Lord.
In the presence of the Lord. Blind
My
Faith,
sweet
Eric
Lord.
Clapton. Right. So I was in year 12 at Lilydale when Jesus Christ Superstar, the original concert album, came out with Deep Purple as the band and the London Symphony Orchestra, whoever it was, Ian Gillan playing, I think, Judas. And so that album, which is a collectible now, was because after that album shuffled off the stage, the musical film album is now the standard. Jesus Christ Superstar. And to me, it has its moments, but it's nowhere near that gritty, bluesy British rock thing, you know, which I heard in that album. And that album blew me away completely.
Yeah, Richie Blackmore on guitar was incredible.
Right.
Yeah.
And I just played it over and over and over in my year 12 going, what the hell? You know, how did this turn up? And then when I went to Avondale the next year in 71, Godspell appeared. And that was quite explicitly based on the Gospel of St. Matthew and had a very Christian, in a universal sense, very Catholic message. And I thought, wow, there's something happening here. And hence I talked to Lowell about let's do something, because I had a little group called Inner Light. Thank you, George Harrison, for the name of the group, which was a song on the flip side of Lady Madonna, if I remember. And as much as I tried, I couldn't get Lady Madonna into a gospel context, but Inner Light certainly worked. And that became the name of our little group at Avondale, with Rhonda Eilert, Cal Durrant, and Trafford Fisher. And that was our group that year. And I wanted to do something because we'd been invited to Hamilton Adventist Church to put on a concert in the afternoon meeting. And so worked up with Lowell a whole bunch of songs to try out with Inner Light and the Caldwell Family. Basically, that was the beginning of Freedom.
Right.
And Freedom grew out of those influences I'd heard on radio at the end of boarding school, and then specifically Jesus Christ Superstar and Godspell. And so, Lowell, let's give it a go. Let's give it a go. And he came up with the first set of lyrics. Vinegar. I'll hand over to you, Lowell.
Well, I thought there was another element, and that was when you and me and Terry and Bev Wilkinson went to Newcastle to the poetry reading. And I I don't know, I was too shy to read. Even though I'd been reading at the Domain the year before, I don't know, maybe because I had a woman in the car who had a beautiful speaking voice. And so we thought maybe if she read my poems and Robert had a guitar, and that became the act, and I'd watch them.
Right.
But you see, hearing the narrator, I think hearing her voice, I think Robert sort of combined that element with everything that he said so that you get the freedom music. But then you go to Bev Wilkinson, who's, you can hear her now on the original tapes
Yeah.
anyway.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
That's right, Lowell. That's dead right.
It's interesting. This so my experience was more the secular, and then finding the gospel artists who are interpreting the secular. I missed that little link that you guys had where you were noticing the gospel influence in the secular music, and then so you've had an extra link there that informed your music.
It was a religious era, Peter.
Yeah. Yeah.
Everyone had a religion.
Yeah, that's
You know,
interesting.
I
Yeah.
mean, one of my friends, his cousin became a Hare Krishna.
Yeah.
You know, there was the Guru Maharaji, there were the Children of God, there were bloody Hare Krishnas everywhere.
I remember down the main street of Sydney there, you'd
Absolutely.
go to the
And
movies,
so
and
everyone
there
had
they were.
Maya Baba.
Yes.
You know,
Yeah.
who had that.
Yeah.
There was a band who, and I mean, the only atheists we knew, they were science students.
Yeah.
Even at Avondale, Robert will remember, there was that undercurrent of atheism in the
Yeah.
science faculty that really there wasn't in the English arts faculty. We just took it. I wasn't particularly religious, the gospel and all that stuff, until right at the end of Freedom. I mean, I was prepared to write anything if Robert said write it.
Yeah.
And I was writing poems from 1968 for Signs of the Times.
Yeah.
So I was getting paid to write
As a
poems.
writer.
That
Yeah.
was always good to me. And one of them I wrote for Signs of the Times that they never got was one
Yeah.
called Vinegar. I think I'll let Robert take over now.
Can I just add something before you do there? Because what part of the reason I'm really enjoying this series is finding out what's special about this time period, and we'll discuss later how it turns into this Adventist gospel revival. And I'm just by chatting to you guys, I'm starting to see it, because as I was coming into the music scene, late 70s, 79, 80, 81, it was no longer the melting pot in the secular world of gospel and secular merging. So what you guys are saying is that 67 to 77 era maybe was very much a melting pot in the whole world, in all the in the Western world, the secular and the spiritual and the atheism and the Eastern. It was all kind of blending and colliding together.
That was the Beatles, wasn't it, Robert?
Yeah.
Definitely.
And so
They were the. Go on.
So that kind of explosion is what was creating this kaleidoscope of incredible creativity and outpouring that I think then permeated into Adventism. But we'll come to that a bit later. So this is fascinating. So tell us about the Vinegar story.
Just a pause on that explosion, Peter. When Sgt. Pepper's came out in 1967, you know, that blew my mind completely.
Yes.
I thought pop music was about, quote, silly love songs, unquote. And then that thing turned up and I went, wow. You know, and the Beatles are already pushing the boundaries of what is a pop song. You know, Dylan's very conservative up to that point because he was sticking to the ballad format, whether it was acoustic or electric, it didn't really matter. He was singing 12-bar blues variations for his lyrics because the lyrics mattered more than the musical melodic thing behind it. But when the Beatles started exploring jazz, avant-garde, you know, blues, folk, classical, and classical was just that was a mind blower to hear the orchestra and the orchestral arrangements of George Martin. I took that album to the Solomon Islands with me in the August holidays of 1967
Wow.
as a 15-year-old. I just turned 15, and I think I spent the whole 2 weeks every day. I'd wait for my mother to go to work, and then I just thrashed it till I
Yeah.
learned the songs and worked out the chords. And it was some chords I couldn't work out, so I ended up buying the sheet music when I got back to Australia to check. I didn't know what B11th was. What's a B11th? Well, it's a ninth of the suspended fourth added to it. I didn't. My music theory in the Sydney Adventist Brass Band hadn't developed that far, but so I was learning a lot, and that album, it convinced me to give up the brass band and really take up the guitar seriously.
Yeah. Okay. But
So
you were
when
still very much involved with your faith. So this is interesting. I'm super envious and jealous because I didn't get to the first wave of that experience. For me to listen to Sergeant Pepper's and a lot of these, was it Pet Sounds and some of these classic albums was 5 to 10 years after. So it must have been amazing to just the current wave to be right there listening to the creativity as it was being birthed.
It was, Peter, and I was so overwhelmed with Sergeant Pepper's. I had to destroy my copy to try and purge myself of. I felt as if a spirit had totally possessed me.
Wow.
And I took it out the back of the to the incinerator of the Caldwell family home and got the light, the torch, and the matches, and just set fire to it as some sort of sacrifice to my Yahweh God, who would probably condemn me for being so enamored of the musical form. But
wow,
that's how intense I was about music at that point. So when I met Lowell again in 71, I was ready to go. And there is a third element, Lowell. We started street preaching before we really got serious about our collaborations.
Yes.
And Lowell would say, "What are we going to do?" And I'd say, 12 bar and E. and off we'd go. And I'd leave it to him to make up the words, extemporize the words on the spot to the Wyong train commuters as they were coming home on a Saturday night.
I love it.
Sydney.
And the next song, 12 bar in G.
12 bar in A.
Oh, shuffle.
Am I allowed to jump around, Robert?
Lowell's only question was, slow one or fast? It was a very fun time, Peter. It was a very fun time.
Oh, look, exciting.
Even in those moments, you were exploring what you could do with your instrument. You were actually practicing.
Yeah.
And so when Vinegar came along, he showed me the words, piece of paper, and said, "There's this." Okay, so I took it away, and I'd been, in year 12, I'd also taught myself jazz guitar, rudimentary jazz guitar out of a jazz guitar book, Mickey Baker's Methods, volumes 1 and 2.
Oh, yes, I've got that. I've got those.
You got that?
Yeah, they're fantastic.
Fantastic, aren't they? There are books that can teach and there are books that can't. In that book, I bought Ivor Mayrantz. I bought 2 or 3.
Yeah.
And that book just spoke to me. It just said, here's some jazz chord progressions. Practice them until your fingers get used to the shifts. And here are some jazz, elementary jazz scales. And anyway, so I was working on a riff with the guitar, shifting from 3/4 time to 4/4. I didn't really have any lyrics. And then Vinegar just fell into place. I just looked at the page and I went, I'll go and work on this. And then I came back, I think, Lowell, and I sang it to you in your bedroom. And you liked it. You said, "Oh, that's interesting," or something like that. And
well, I was amazed because give me water. I want water. And then you did something on the guitar that sounded like
I put a B11th in there, Peter.
Oh,
And it was a
11th.
C11th, I think, or a G11.
You brought in
on.
that pretty water chord.
So he did this thing, and I
Little
mean,
cascade.
it was just so far ahead of anything that,
Yeah.
because I was writing songs, and if they had more than 2 chords in them, possibly 3, I just didn't like them. So it had to go and suddenly this comes along and he's running up and down the neck of the guitar, and I'm thinking, wow, let's do, let's keep going,
Yeah.
It's wonderful. It was
You were
so
more
exciting.
the Lou Reed kind of D to G kind of
Nah,
chord
Peter, the
aficionado.
best thing I ever did with my life was to stop playing guitar and stop singing. I just read. So
Yeah.
I was on a show, a Cream cover band show, and they just got me, and I was reading. I read the first chapter of 1967, Robert, and I was looking at these people I was on stage with, and I was just thinking, mate, if I was playing guitar and singing, I just wouldn't be within cooey of this microphone.
Well, that's why the both of you made such a good team. Have you got the lyrics? Have you got the lyrics there to Vinegar at all?
Oh yeah, we would have. Probably know them. Watch the blood run down my side, down that Roman spear. Must you crush me to the last, though my time is near? Why is it you can't understand the reality of what you do? Have I wasted all my life if these events do not reach you and bring me water? I want water. Give him vinegar, you sneer, and you laugh as I lift the sponge upon that spear.
Oh, wow.
Awesome. Awesome words, Peter?
Yeah. What a great collaboration that you both meet and start producing this work. So you'd met initially at school, then again at college. Take us now into this sort of like go with the flow with whatever you want to talk about, but lead me into this kind of era that in Melbourne where you were kind of Lowell, you didn't go down to Melbourne though, did you? But you were.
He did.
No,
Oh,
I
okay.
went to Newcastle and did my dip ed.
Yeah.
Now, right at the tail end of freedom, so I wasn't a religious guy.
Yeah.
But then that year, 1971, Robert, it seemed to me, was talking about this thing called the gospel more and more. Whereas to me, the gospel was don't smoke cigarettes or something, or
Right.
don't. And then I wrote Simon's song, and it had the lines in it, and just remember when you walk, when you walk, you don't walk alone. The
Right.
Calvary thing.
Yeah.
And then Robert said to me, "That's the gospel. When Jesus walked the Calvary Road, all men walked with him." You see, and I kind of thought, oh, that's interesting. So I went away and thought about that for a bit. So
again, Lowell produced the set of words. I remember that there's pictures in my mind of this where I had worked up a thing on the piano, Peter. Lowell and I used to go down to the auditorium on the big old, what is that piano? It wasn't a Steinway, it was that grand piano that used
The
to be
big
up
grand
in this.
piano on the stage there.
Yeah. So it started with B, book or something. Anyway, we used to bash out jams. I borrowed Smiley Martin's guitar, and Lowell knew how to play great 12-bar boogies on the piano, and we'd thrash along in there whenever we had time on our hands. And so I'd taken up a bit of piano to augment after hearing Let It Be, and the way that Paul played the piano there. I thought, I can play that. I'm sure if I gave it a go. And And so I worked out Simon's song on the piano. And then as soon as he showed me the words, I think I dragged you up to the second story Watson Hall piano room,
Yes, that's
recreation
right.
room.
That's right. I was
just said,
amazed.
what about this? And
I gave him the words. He looked at
Yeah.
the words, and he said, "I've got a tune for that." And then he dragged me off to the
And
piano, Watson Hall.
I love how you're excited about each other's contribution to what you're creating. It's like you inspire each other. You go, "Wow, those words are amazing! What? How did you do the music for that?" I can
Well,
just
it was
imagine
like
it.
that.
And so you're
It was
kind of
like
you're starting to fall in love a bit with the gospel there, Lowell, as you indirectly are writing gospel words in Simon's song.
yeah. And then Robert went to Melbourne. I went to Newcastle
Yeah.
to do a dip ed, and I wrote a play for the Newcastle Marionette Theatre. And so I was doing, and poets in Newcastle. But Robert in Melbourne, and he'll tell you all about that. But the bit that struck me was he came up with a whole heap of new songs, Trinity, which I'm sure you know.
Yeah.
Have you heard the news?
Yeah.
And if you listen to what I was writing before, they were like personification. So I become Simon Peter, or I become Simon of Cyrene, and I say what Herod would
Okay.
say.
Right.
Well,
Right.
Jesus Christ, don't talk to me about philosophy. You know, I'm becoming someone else. Now, what Robert did was he was coming up with these theological propositions of the person and work of the Trinity. And I'm just looking at that and I'm thinking, I didn't know you could do that with a song. And then having you heard the news was a rallying
Yeah.
cry.
Yes.
Have you heard the news? You
Been
know,
set free.
and
Yeah.
they were gospel, but they had this content.
Yes. That
there
song
wasn't
had.
a lot.
Sorry, go
Go
ahead,
ahead.
Bob. You go, Bob.
Oh, I was just going to say there wasn't a lot of gospel at Avondale when I was there because there was no Des Ford on campus
No.
for the 2 years that I was there.
Yeah.
And there were, I think, 5 PhDs in the science faculty, Lowell, and only 1 in the theology department.
Really?
And 1 in history. That was the little fellow. What's his name? Jewish name. Salem.
Oh, yes.
Oh, okay.
He was the sole PhD in the theology faculty, and Noel Pavitt Clapham was the sole PhD in the history,
Yeah.
literature. There was no one in education.
There was no one there that was really sparking with the gospel.
Right. And so I had to go digging myself because that's just what you did. And a girl called Rosemary Taylor, who happened to be Robert Brinsmead's niece, turned up for 1 semester.
Right.
And her mother was Robert Brinsmead's older sister. She turned up, and bright, sunny smile. And at every sort of cafeteria interaction or worship interaction in the chapel, she would say to me, are you saved by intrinsic righteousness or extrinsic righteousness?
Okay.
She'd been talking to her uncle.
What are you talking about? I had no clue, absolutely zero. I thought the gospel was the Holy Spirit comes into your life, makes you perfect, and you go to heaven if you've got enough brownie points.
Wow.
And that's what I thought up until Rosemary Taylor started hitting me with, are you saved by imputed righteousness or imparted righteousness?
Yeah.
What's the difference, Rosemary? Well, let me explain.
Really?
And half an hour later, I'm still grappling to see the difference and why it mattered. And she said, well, can I give you something to read? I said, okay, yeah. And then people who knew who she was were sort of warning me off her. And I took the literature, which was a whole bunch of present truths with these articles in them, all fresh, because Bob Brinsmead, pre-72, if you look at present truth, it's not about this.
No.
He had the gospel, yes, but it wasn't his major theme. And so I started getting into these, and then she said, I'll lend you some tapes. Okay. So my poor roommate, Caressa Tagai, he had to put up with me going from Jimi Hendrix records on the turntable to Bob Brinsmead on the on a little player, a little reel to reel that Rosemary
Wow.
lent people. I wasn't the only
From one
student,
rebel to another. Yeah. So
and that's how I discovered the gospel, Peter.
gospel, that is
Yeah.
fascinating. I
Yes.
did
In
not
fact,
know that. Yeah.
they raided my room. The preceptors in Watson Hall started to hear bad stories that I was drifting into heresy, and so
Wow.
they came and took all my present truths away.
Isn't that hilarious? They took away, they saw Bob Brinsmead as more of a threat than Jimi Hendrix.
And of course, some of our roommates up there at the time, I won't name them, but they had Led Zeppelin albums and Black Sabbath, and I'd go around to their rooms and load up on headphones, because
Yeah.
you couldn't publicly play that music.
No.
Mm.
Where is Rosemary now? Do you know what happened to her?
I'd love to know. I haven't heard from her since 1971, Peter. And,
Wow.
and if anyone knows what happened to her or where she is,
Yeah. Well, I think
what an amazing enabler she was.
yeah, I think Cal Brinsmead's watching today. He might know. And Bob himself occasionally tunes in too and watches the episodes. Boy, that's fascinating. The song "Have You Heard the News?" that exploded in my mind. It was the first time, so I had to vicariously find out the journey that you guys had gone on by listening to what you were producing, and that the opening lines, "Have you heard the news? You've been set free."
No, that was what Robert was producing, not what
Yeah,
we
yeah.
were producing.
I'm meaning collectively.
Well,
I know
yes,
that.
we came back together, but
And then you came back after.
that was Robert on his own, written all those songs. And
Um,
Refugee was another one, which I thought was a wonderful song. And I actually said to Robert after he'd written it,
and that's on this album.
yeah. Well, I said, you don't need me. And then I remember your answer. You said, I do need you, Lowell. And I said, well, why? Your words are... And then you said, because I write more tunes than I do words. And
Yeah.
so there we go. That was the answer. But then we came back together again, and
Yeah.
I suppose...
So tell us about that coming back together again. So you'd gone to Newcastle.
Well, I moved to Warragul.
And Bob, you'd
in
gone
74.
To Melbourne.
to Melbourne.
So
Yeah.
physically, I was...
So you're both near each other
to,
again.
Yeah, East Brown Church and,
Oh, right.
street preaching, occasionally from Warragul, not as someone living in there. And I suppose the song that I wrote that reflects what Robert was doing, that theological thing, but also very Des Ford, was news to me.
Yes. Now that's on Sally. I mean, All My Friends, isn't it? Which album
No,
is
it's
that
on
on?
Refugee.
Roberts.
Oh, hang on. It's on
But
Refugee.
if you follow the words,
Yes, it was news to me. Yeah. On this one.
my feet have wandered, and your hands and feet were nailed.
Yeah.
My head has been turned. Yours crowned with thorns.
Yeah.
And you died in my failure. They literally come out of Des Ford's sermon. I think it was tied to the cross.
Oh, really? Tell us a bit more about that, Lowell.
Well, I mean, it just embarrasses me because I meant it when I wrote it, and when I hear it now, because I'm not that person anymore.
Yeah.
And I walked in. Actually, this was weird. Des Ford was taking a talk at the Macquarie Uni. I was staying with Martin Sharp, and I said I wouldn't mind hearing this guy. Well, Martin's open to that sort of thing. And so he said, I'll come along. And so we got, because of the big tiny tin pictures at Macquarie, so we walked past that, go into this hall, and there was a special item before Des Ford was speaking, the Caldwells. and they were singing, it was news to me. I mean, and I just nearly wept because I was going, you know, who
I
was
wrote
that
those.
person who wrote
Yeah.
those words? It's
Interesting.
whereas some other religious songs that I've written and people think are full of meaning, I wrote them because they were needed.
Yeah.
Because I was writing plays and
Yeah.
somebody needs to make a prayer, so I wrote a prayer. But it was for a play. I didn't necessarily feel all those. But this one I did. So
Interesting.
that was awkward.
So and Des was speaking that night, and
Yeah.
the Caldwells are the support act.
Yeah, and Des was speaking that afternoon, and I
and
turned up with Martin.
they're singing It Was News to Me.
Martin met Des, and Martin gave Des a Tiny Tim album, and I wish I had a photograph. You know,
I think there is a photo, isn't it? I think there is a photo of that, isn't it?
Glorious.
So were you there that night, Bob?
No.
No.
It was an afternoon.
Afternoon, right.
Peter Jensen was with us, actually.
Right. That is incredible. And I think part of we watched, when I interviewed Kenton last week, Kenton Johansson, we watched the Let the Sun Shine movie that the church had suppressed since, I think, 1970 or 71. But what got me was the sense of joy and excitement that these young people, you guys essentially, had for this gospel. This, have you heard the news? You've been set free. It was news to me. These kind of lyrics contain a joy to them. So Lowell, you're now more of a, you've moved on. You're a different person, like you say. But can you speak to the time when you wrote that song, not as a ghostwriter for someone else, but literally coming from a source of joy within you? Can you tell us a bit about how you felt at the time and how come it was an authentic, genuine?
Well, I think there was a lot of idealism. Don't you think so, Robert? We thought it was going to go, in the direction it didn't go in. Hence the rage in the persecution games. Because after 5 years of the optimism of which you speak, what happened to Des Ford and just seeing it all. I was just furious, with myself. How could I get sucked in, And I think one of the things that people are missing when they're looking at the Des Ford story and the, the interviews you've been running, is people are trying to explain it theologically. And it wasn't about theology. It was, business sociology, wasn't it? It was bureaucratic. And all the decisions that are made, Des Ford think they'd listen to him because he's a religious guy and, he's bringing them the gospel. And they're going, how does that work with marketing, nepotism? Who's going to be the general conference?
Yeah, I know.
How do we keep it in the family? And so everything about Adventism, suddenly I just saw it as business. Sociology. The same thing can apply to BHP as to Adventism. And a lot of what I'm saying really comes from Robert teaching me the sociology of leadership, because by the time Persecution Games was around, Robert was a sociologist.
See, that's why, like I chatted to both of you in season 2, which turned out to be 86 interviews on Glacier View. Massive resource that's put out into the world there, but it was in many ways highlighting exactly what you're just saying there, Lowell. And what I'm trying to do now is go, look, where is this source though of something joyful that wasn't just Pollyanna happy? There was some meat within the joy there. And yes, later on there was all the politics, the theology that you can analyze from a sociological perspective that's very discouraging, actually. But I'm trying to highlight this era where you guys the rubber was hitting the road with your joy, your sense of the gospel. What did it mean to you, this freedom, this liberation? Because I think it's something that actually can bring a bit of joy to people today as well, as they look at the whole Adventist experience.
Why do we want to bring them joy?
Well, I mean,
great
you know,
what to say,
you
Peter.
know, Lowell, I've left the church, but I still find joy when I listen to these albums, you know.
It's great.
And I know a
It's
lot of
great.
people that are on the fringe of Adventism, people that have left. Yeah, there's a kernel of something there that I think has been kind of squashed, or a light's been put out or tried to be put out, that I think the fan needs to be flamed still for some reason.
Good on you. Good on you.
Well, I'm not an atheist, Peter.
Right.
I'm not anything. And it's probably been like that all my life. I
Mm.
mean, I don't think I'm a race, because I don't think I understand race, you know, what nationality are you. I've never been a Seventh-day Adventist properly.
Mm.
I tried to be a mystic, but I can't keep still long enough. I fidget too much to meditate. And I've never voted Liberal or Labor. So I'm
Yeah.
very...
You're a bit of a maverick.
No, I just define myself by what I'm not.
Yeah.
And I'm not an atheist, and I'm
Yeah,
not a
okay.
Christian. But what I do is I'll take religious books and to bed, you know.
Yeah.
So the last thing I read, you know, I work through the Quran, or the one I like is the Tao Te Ching, the one I like best.
Yeah, me too.
But
I
I
love
don't
that.
agree with it.
No, but what a great you
It's a
know, the
wonderful
more you
read,
think you know the Tao, you know.
yeah.
If you
But all
think
that
you know the
keeping
Tao,
still,
you don't, or something.
yeah, but the keeping still and the silence and the waiting, you know, I'm not good at that.
But it sounds like you're a true free thinker.
Oh, I don't know. I just...
That doesn't want to be labeled. I'm not even trying to label.
Oh, I
I'm
don't
really
know.
just saying there's something fresh there that I think benefits Adventists to this day, that are still kind of caught in such a wave of legalism and Ted Wilson back in power. It's so nice to just see some of this positive stuff. I want to just bring a few things up onto the screen that people have been bringing into the conversation here. I think this is Fleetwood. Hey, by the way, those watching from Facebook, can you just put your name in your comment? Because it only comes up as Facebook user. I think this was Fleetwood wrote, Ford speaking always was accompanied by the Holy Spirit revealing Christ. Now this channel, Answering Adventism, go and check it out, you guys. It's a brilliant channel, new channel. Answering Adventism is a YouTube channel, and he's watching today from Tennessee. Welcome, and love to interview you sometime about your incredible channel. And I think Kenton also, not Kenton, Fleetwood added this. Brinsmead was also accompanied by the Holy Spirit throughout the 70s and early 80s. There's a long one here, which I will read. Oh, this is from Gillian. Gillian's watching. Gillian Ford. Lovely to see you all. Just got back from Bunnings, bird bath emergency.
See, I think the problem with Des Ford, and I can see and Brinsmead, is they had absolutely no understanding of pop culture.
Oh, I know. Yeah.
And this kind of undid them in a way, because they're charismatic leaders, and there's this youthful movement coming up, and they're not
tapping into it.
Oh, well, you know, Ford never took a negative stance on anything.
No.
Accepting. I mean, Des Ford, I talked to him about smoking marijuana once.
Right.
We talked for about half an hour. We got through the whole thing without him using the word marijuana.
I love it.
Let the great God come in, and all the little gods go out, all that stuff.
We'll come back to this point in a minute, because Jim Johansson, I think, was a theologian, gospel minister that did tap into the culture.
I think you're right.
Yeah, so we'll come back to that'll be our first point we kick off again after some of these messages. This one is also from Fleetwood. Mate, great to have you watching today, Fleetwood. And I'll read some of it off screen because it's too long. Brinsmead's present truth in the early 70s brought out how prior to the Reformation, the Renaissance of the arts had to take place to pave the way for it. That's interesting. I made the connection of the 1960s Renaissance of the arts and how Christianity began a new Reformation followed after. So the same principle was at work in the late 60s, early 70s, creating the environment for a new Reformation. Australia was the centre of the new Reformation. That's interesting. But the US benefited and caught fire. But its source was Australia. It had the spirit of prophecy, meaning it made testimony to Jesus. That's
Yeah.
See, that's another thing that I think counted against Des Ford. He was
right.
Australian.
Yes. Yeah. But it kind of, in the big picture, looking back, I think it counted for him in the long run. Yeah, it showed that he was able to be a bit separate. Here's one for you, Bob. This is Dylan. Mullah from Fiji, Lowell, and Dad.
Is that Max?
He's having a holiday.
Oh, nice.
That's your yada. That's your yada.
Oh, yada.
And hey, this is a great one from Luke
Great.
Miller. This is great to hear from. Well, good, glad you're watching there, Luke. These two men totally opened up a pathway for me to experience the message outside of the confusing, institutionalized setting I was growing up in. They were conduits for the Holy Spirit to shine. That is so well said. And look, honestly, guys, I've said this to you myself. What Luke just said there applied to me. From 79. That I think sometimes when I tell you guys this, I think you think, oh, he's these guys, you just, shooting us these nice little stories, but you genuinely had a huge influence on us during that time. And as Luke just said there, during this confusing institutionalized setting, that's what we were in. So you guys helped to free us,
Peter, when you're ready, I'll just mention, if it's okay.
Yes.
The Caldwells, particularly dear brother Ivan.
Yes.
And his dad, Uncle Dave.
David, yeah.
Who encouraged me to keep writing and to keep exploring music. In the 70s, I was too shy to sing most places except the street. As soon as we got out onto the street, I felt more comfortable with the street preachers, as our nickname developed through the 70s, and with Lowell initially. But I handed all my songs, every time I wrote a song that I thought Ivan Caldwell and his dad on cello could make something of, arrangement-wise, I'd share it with them. And in later years, I had to go back to Ivan to be reminded of some of the songs I had written for them, because he would always document them, put them in a book with the chords.
Yeah.
I'd hitchhike to Sydney and a tune and the song had come to me. So when I got to Sydney, I'd say, here's one, and work it out in his flat.
Yeah.
And he would take it down. That song, Peter's song was almost like that. Peter's song was almost developed like that. And another one, the Holy Spirit song, I just, hitchhiking on the side of the Hume Highway, 1970 mostly, occasionally 69, but mostly 1970. There's nothing to do in between hitching a ride. So I had a guitar, usually borrowed from one of my fellow students, and I'd entertain myself thinking up songs or practicing chord progressions or whatever.
Yeah, boy, I love that. I'd love to have Ivan and Debbie on the program, actually. Yeah, because they were featured in the Let the Sun Shine video as well.
Jim Johansson, I don't know whether you're going to come back to him.
I'll come back to that. I'll just finish reading some of these comments. There's so many people commenting. I just want to pick a few. This is Cal Stewart's writing here. It's not about being an Adventist. The joy that comes from understanding the gospel is the bottom line from being a Christian. And I think, Cal, and that's a great point, and I think that's what I'm saying. Somewhere, even within this confusion and institutionalized kind of setting that Luke was talking about, it can be found, this this little gem of a gospel. And so I'm not suggesting that it has to be found within Adventism, but I'm saying it's great when you do find it within Adventism, because it's potentially it's quite a miracle that it actually can be found in there. Luke's written again, all my friends are sinners. Wow, I know that album word for word.
Yeah, good on you, Luke.
And
Excellent.
Dave Wilmoth. Hey, how you going, Dave? Good
Hello,
to see
Dave.
you.
Wow,
And
Years, decades.
Dave's written Mickey Baker. That's what started my journey into chords and progressions. Devoured it. That is such a great book. Volume 1 and 2. Dave, while you're watching, were you in the sunshine? There's a shot there of a camera angle. I can't remember who was singing, but there's a dark black or maybe a deep burgundy looking Les Paul Gibson. Was that you playing there? Let us know in the comments. So let's dig into this. Sorry, you go ahead. Oh no. So let's dig into this Jim Johansson thing. You guys head back. You're both going to East Prahran a couple of times yourselves. You're bumping into each other. You notice this Jim Johansson guy. Tell us.
Robert was a regular there.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
I just popped in and out.
You'd pop in and out.
Yeah. Robert was there the whole time.
The fellow that introduced me to Jim, I heard Jim preach. He came up to Lilydale, to the boarding school in 1970, 69, thereabouts. The second time he came with Gordon Box. And both of them, you can imagine, 1970, were both young, dynamic, fresh approach, fresh language. They were sort of keyed in, it seemed to me, to the the buzz of the time. And I wasn't on my best behaviour. I had a friend, and we started a flagon club, and thought we should occasionally on our bushwalks, we should just go up the bush and have a nip of the flagon that we hit up the end of the log up there, just to see what it felt like. And we liked it a bit. So one Sabbath afternoon, I was quite tipsy. I could hardly stand up, and Jim Joey turned up as we got to know him, and he put the word out to the students. He wanted someone who could, because we're having an outdoor afternoon meeting. Is there someone who could accompany in the chorus singing part of the program that they were going to present? And I went to bed. I thought, if I get up, I'm going to fall over, and I'm going to be in really big trouble. And so somebody came and got me and said, they're calling for you to come and play guitar. I said to my mate, I could do it, but you'll have to stand me up against the tree. And so he did. He propped me up against the tree with the guitar, and Jim Joey's leading the rousing, song service, and I'm doing my best to play. There were no charts, nothing. I knew that most of the songs. And belted along with it on this acoustic guitar. Afterwards, he came up to me and said, "Geez, you're really good on that guitar." And then I realized that having some alcohol in your system wasn't exactly antipathetic to being a good muso. Which is not, I'm not here to advertise that. I'm just telling you as a fact.
It's a great story.
The penny dropped, and because I thought I was panicking that I wasn't with it, And he said, "Oh, that was really great. You've got a really good relaxed style there, Bob."
It was a key ingredient to the relaxed gospel music approach.
I just thought, I'm not going to try this again. I'd sort of gone over the odds, but I'd gotten away with it. But I realised Jim Joey knew stuff, And when I got to know him a couple of years later at East Prahran, he was preaching the gospel, and I got to meet him through Peter McDougall, May he
Right.
rest in
Yeah,
peace.
yeah. He's another
Who
name
was,
that keeps popping up as being quite a charismatic leader at that time.
he certainly was. He
Tell us
was,
a bit more about him.
well, he had a Bible study group of people who were, there were lots of Bible study groups going on in the early 70s, and he had one. And he went street preaching. He said, Bob, the sound in the street's not very good. Tomorrow, Monday, whenever it was, we're going shopping. I'm going to buy a guitar amp. We need Mike, you tell me what we need to make this thing go, you know. So we went and bought a Strauss with, you know, the head, the whole lot.
Wow.
And,
So the whole
and
PA
wow,
system.
PA
Wow.
system. A guy called Rupert, who was a new street comer, non-Adventist background, hippie guy, first hippie bloke I knew, had hair right down to his waist. He was a hobbit, really. And it's a great story about Rupert is when we street preachers went north, caravan up to Kingscliff to listen to Bob Brinsmead preach over Easter or over Christmas holiday period. We'd camp on Bob's property. At least the rest of them would camp there. I often stayed with my first wife, Andrea Martin. She had been with Ray Martin and his family down at the beach. But we soon got into trouble because we were talking about this before. Lowell, you know, there was no cultural compatibility between Bob Brinsmead's perfectionist awakeners, and he'd attracted all these street preacher hippie types.
Right.
And you know, Ray Martin was my father-in-law, and he was constantly, Robert, can you have a chat to that fellow there and tell him, you know, he needs to tidy up.
Interesting.
Stuff like this, you know. Are they having showers? There were all these ridiculous questions about the look of the street preaching.
Preaching. Too hippie.
Too hippie, and the behaviour. I mean, Rupert, our roadie, made the mistake of getting up to greet the sunrise naked and do yoga out the front of his tent on the top of Bob Brinsmead's hill, while the awakeners ushering off to the toilets and the shower and ablutions block with their towels and soap, and Rupert's up on the hill. Oh, that was big. That was big. There were lots of these little cultural issues. As you say, you know?
And interesting dichotomies of blends of people that were drawn to Bob Brinsmead as well, like
really, Peter. It just goes to the point that I think Cal Stewart said it didn't matter what your context was. If you heard the drum beat of the gospel, you were drawn to it. You know, it was quite unpredictable. There were such a variety of people coming out of all the churches, and the one that I went to, thank you to Peter McDougall, was East Paran, where Jim Johansson would you know, sally forth. And
that brings me to one of Robert's early songs. This is before we rekindled the friendship, and that's the song "Come Just As You Are." And I was rooming in 1971 with Dale Ratliff, who was gay. And he would be praying away the gay, which annoyed the crap out of me. But anyway, because I said to him, you can't be two minorities, just be gay, you know. But anyway, that's beside the point.
Gay and Adventist.
You've got a gay man who was very religious.
Very
and you've got
wonderful, beautiful man.
Or nude showerers or whatever. And they're really religious. I mean, you're lucky to have these people come in the door.
Yeah, no, yeah.
And then, you know, the things poor Dale went through was just horrible, you know. And the thing that was so strange was, because I've never felt unsaved, You know, I mean, if there's a God and there's good guys, I'm in there with them. I don't particularly sin, you know, and I'm carrying on. Whereas Dale, who was religious, I mean,
Right.
he prayed. I didn't pray. He prayed, all that stuff.
Yeah,
And I'm
yeah.
looking at this and thinking, here's a man who thinks he's going to not be saved. And I guess it irritated my arrogance, sort of
Yeah.
probably was the only tension point between us, really. But come just as you are, you know. I mean,
Yeah. And did knowing him inspire that song?
No. Robert wrote that in high school.
I'd written
Right.
that at boarding school. I'd written
Right.
it was one of my first ever.
Right.
I might have written a few, you know, little ditty type things that didn't
Yeah.
work, but that one worked completely whole. And I played it to Ivan and Uncle Dave in Strathfield in their home when I was up there for a school holidays, and they both loved it and said, "Write some more. You got to write more." I
Yeah.
said,
Well, they've never
"Wow."
stopped playing it, Robert. They still
That's
play
right.
it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that you only need one encouragement. I don't know about you,
Yes.
Peter.
Yes, definitely.
If
Yeah.
someone just says, "That's great,"
Mm.
pat you on the
Mm.
back, you
Mm.
go, "Thank you. I'm going to keep doing it," whether
Yeah.
you like it or not thereafter. But Dale, what a magnificent person he was. He was
Yeah.
a
He
great
was lovely.
critic. He was a great critic, Peter.
Yeah.
I'd play him. I'd try songs out for them, and then he'd always say something that indicated what he, you know, and I respected his judgment. I played him one because he came and taught in Victoria and would come to visit me in Ferntree Gully with his family.
Mm.
He went down that road for a while, and I played him a song. I can't remember what it was, Lowell, and he just sat there and looked at me and said, "Sounds like test pattern music."
Sounds like what?
Test pattern.
Test pattern music.
Dale. Yes, he was frank, wasn't he? He was frank.
Okay, thanks, Dale. I'll try another one. I'll try something else. You know, but you need those sort of people in your life to
Yeah.
just
To
draw
encourage
you
and
along.
help modify and keep you grounded and all those things. Yeah. Hey,
And the hippie movement, Peter, was a gay movement. I don't know
yeah,
whether
it's
you,
interesting. No, I've looked a little bit into the history of San Francisco and the hippie movement
yeah,
there, and
yeah,
there's lots of
yeah,
gay leadership
yeah, yeah.
behind the scenes. Yeah.
When you look at the lyrics of a lot of the first hippie song albums and whatnot, "Wear a Flower in Your Hair" and all
Mm.
scarves, and it was code for come out. You know, it was a good
Mm.
scene we can create of peace
Yeah.
and love. And the first rainbow people were San Franciscan hippies
Yeah.
who started the
Yeah.
ball rolling of universal love and openness. And, you know,
And
somebody
very.
needs to,
Sorry, go ahead.
well, somebody needs to kick the door down on organized religion and
Yeah.
just say, "Come on, guys, what are you talking about?"
Yes.
You know,
Yeah.
we've had the peace and love message for 2,000 years, and we've had it revived since the 60s, and
Yeah.
it's going through it again, and there's still this devilish resistance
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
to having a truly open, universal gospel.
Mm.
You know,
I can't understand why you can't get up in the morning and go, "Oh, I think I'll be a Buddhist today." And then the next day, "What's your favorite religion?"
Yeah.
"Oh, I'm a Shinto or Zoe."
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Just, I
Yeah.
mean, you do that with your poems, you do that with your songs.
Yeah. I
Why do you
agree.
get to
Yeah.
sort of institutionalize? And
Mm.
religious thought is not in the rational box. You know,
Mm.
this argument of religion and science, they've got nothing
Mm.
to do with each other. You know, religion belongs where poetry belongs,
Exactly.
you know,
Yeah.
and science belongs somewhere else. And
amen.
and why can't you just, you know, taste from all the trees of good and evil?
Mm. You mentioned earlier the Tao Te Ching, the Lao Tzu who may not have even existed, but there's 400 years worth of incredible teachings for life. Robert, why sociologically speaking? So, for example, the Tao Te Ching originally was just teachings for life. It's not intended to be a religious work, but it became institutionalized to the point where Taoism in many parts of the world is actually a religion. Why do people from a sociological perspective turn this kind of freedom, this joy, this ability to go, hey, I'm going to look at this one day, I'm going to be that this day, I'm going to enjoy Jimi Hendrix, I'm going to enjoy some Bob Brinsmead, I'm going to enjoy a bit of Jesus culture? Why do they institutionalize things all the time?
And some wine.
Yes, yeah. So why do they?
Sorry, what did you say?
So sociological. Oh, go ahead, Lowell.
I just said and wine. I just
He's just adding wine to that list of
list,
that I'm reading out. Like, why do people turn these things into institutions just from a sociological perspective, out of interest?
Well, the standard word is routinization, and routine is the word, routine, ritual. Routinization means the process of taking something which is ephemeral and might be gone after our hour together of that emotion, that sacred holy joy. How do we keep that going? So
Right.
it's a natural reaction to the ephemerality of religious ecstasy. We have to maintain the fire. We have to find a way that we can keep this alive and keep it happening. And so it doesn't matter what human setting you're in, that's going to be the point of. So you can't go to one footy match and explode with, wow, what a win. And then that's it. No, you want that again. So someone's going to develop a calendar, and that game has to be routinized.
Right.
It applies to music.
Yeah.
You can't just compose that, Mr. Bach, for a Sunday morning, church service. So you write the music down. As soon as you write music down, you routinize it.
Yes.
So that you can play it again in some form where you hope to elicit the same
response,
emotional response again.
Yeah.
Now, of course, once you start routinizing, you're going to run the risk of formalism, of creating the expectation state, and that then becomes boring.
Yes.
We've been here, done that. In other words, you desiccate the coconut.
Yeah.
Right? You squeeze all the life out of it.
Yeah.
And what are you left with? Pulp. So religious pulp is very popular because it allows minimal involvement.
Yes.
I can go sit in a pew, right? And organized religion has a really good logic to it, even if it doesn't have lots of other things which are good about it.
Yeah.
But it has the right logic, which is to become the McDonald's of religion, or to give you that.
It's wanting to constantly. It wants to create a framework to constantly recreate that experience, but often that recreation waters it down. Yeah,
there's all sorts of things to it.
Yeah,
well, and there's an argument about whether
one little phrase that Robert used is institutionalizing the charisma. When he explained it to me, institutionalizing the charisma, which really applies in Adventism with Yellow and White especially.
Yeah.
That's why I'm
Yes.
You know, I followed Max Weber down this road, and Lowell will remember because he was studying sociology too, and it was like, you know, Eureka, Lowell! I've had my
Yeah.
Eureka moment. I've found the gospel, but I've also found a way to understand why the gospel is so dangerous to organized religion,
Yeah.
because it comes in and wants to blow the routine apart with something, some fresh wine in fresh wineskins, as you know, and this is what it does. This is what it does. It's never a popular thing, but I also am attracted to prophets rather than priests.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know why women want to become priests, but women make great prophets, and I'm very, very residually hardened against the priesthood, except in the sense of there is a universal priesthood of all believers, blah blah blah. But the institutionalized religion, whether it's Christian, Islamic, what you mentioned, and so on and so forth. I mean, what does it do to the human spirit? I've just finished reading, you know, Mark Shriver's biography of Bergoglio, who's Pope Paul Francis, and we've just seen the death of Benedict, and I follow a lot of religion still. I still read religion literature, sociology of religion, and I'm still immersed in it. But I prefer the prophetic spirit. I prefer the small prophets. I prefer the Old Testament, you know, Jesus aside, of course. But he said John the Baptist, the greatest prophet that's ever, you know.
But
so,
you see, in the late 60s,
Mm.
in the late 60s, that religious time when I'm talking about, you know, about Hare Krishna, that period, you know, there were prophets everywhere. You know? I mean, I knew someone who wanted to become a hermit. And then there was Kevin the prophet, who was at the Domain. And he was like somebody who was, and I've still got his papers fascinated me.
Yeah.
It's just like you dropped an acid trip and you're explaining Revelation. And I kind of liked it, but, you know, as Robert would know, because he's been to the Domain and hippie places, the
Moses David,
prophets everywhere. And that was when I wrote Edges of Adventism. That was another thing. And the church
Great
really
book.
hated, you know, you Fred Steeds, long beard, lived in a car and explained all this prophetic stuff. And, well, they hated him because he was outside there.
Have you got that book you could hold up for us? It's such a good read, that one. It was one of the first books I read on these fringes of Adventism.
Which book?
Lowell, The Edges, yeah. And I was trying to find before 1967 as well.
Lowell's got those.
My picture's frozen, so.
Is it still frozen?
Oh, yeah, Robert's got it.
No.
Oh, yeah,
talking about prophets.
Yeah. Children of God.
Talking about prophets. 1,000 pages of the letters of Moses, David, the children of God prophet, who started at the mid-60s also.
Right.
And, you know, but they're prolific. They're interesting. They're dynamic. They're contradictory. They're all sorts of things, but messy.
Yeah.
What got me going with Edges?
Yeah, hold that up for us to see. That's such a good read.
Can you see it? I can't see the screen.
Yeah. And let me try and kick you off for a second. Is it moving now?
No.
You might have to close your browser and reopen it.
So how do I do that?
We can see you. We can see you clearly.
So how do I close my browser?
What you might need to do, you know, the link I sent you before.
Yeah.
I'll literally remove you from the thing, and you have to click that link again.
Okay.
Let's do that so that you're not frozen. And while you're doing that, I'll be holding up this book and having a quick chat about it.
Well, you're frozen as well.
Oh, okay. Well, it's 1967. I'm going to hold that up, but I'm just going to
Awesome,
remove
awesome.
you. Bob and I will talk about that while you re-click your link. Yeah, so
I
this
just went and got it myself. Peter.
I love it. And I've got the single as well, but it's must be on my turntable over there. It came with
Yeah,
a single, didn't it? Oh, you've got yours in
Yeah.
there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Tell us a bit about this book while we're just waiting for Lowell.
Lowell
Yeah,
had
there I
written-
am. Hello.
Oh, good.
Oh, there he is.
Hey,
You talk
Bob,
about it,
hold
Bob.
up yours again. We had stereo book holding. This is a great read as well.
Talk about it,
Well,
Lowell.
what I wanted to say about edges. Well, let me just say this about edges first. The reason I wrote it had more to do with what Robert said about prophets and priests, because I was teaching at the Adventist school, and one of the things I had to teach was denominational history. And so I've got to teach this class, and it's the most boring thing. You know, we sent three missionaries to Madagascar in 1927, and now we have 25. Yeah, you know. Now let's talk about the Seychelles. It was that sort of tedium, and so I thought that what makes a story interesting is conflict, and so this is nothing to do with Ford or anything like that. It was just I remember reading Canwright, and so I started chasing that. And they were very interesting people, forging Ellen White's signature, and they're just crazy people. And I liked that. And then, and I prepared 6 articles for Robert Parr, who was always good to me. And he was going to run them in the Review and Herald, whatever it's called. Is that the name? The Review. You know, that thing that came out of about, and he was going to do that. And then the conference president, Parmenter, contacted Parr and said, we're not running it. You know, I had Wagner and Jones in there, and we're not running it. It's banned. And then once it was banned, you know, once someone bans something, you want to know all about it and so I started going further into it and realised that I was right in the middle of this Ford, Brinsmead, East Prague, Jim Johansson, all this stuff. And then Robert came in and he said to me, what I had was a series of chapters, but they didn't actually, and they needed some structure. Otherwise, they're just a series of interesting stories. And so that's why you've got the different types of breakaway movements, because they fell into place. First of all, there was the idea of separatism, because there were 4 groups who came out of the Millerites. And then after that, they were perfectionists and pretty crazy. And then afterwards, there was the gospel. So there were my 3 sections. Now there's another section, which is ethnic or minorities. So you've got your Chinese Adventist church and your gay Christian church, and all that. It's too much for little me to cope.
So I want to dip back into East Paran again in a minute, but Robert, while we're talking a bit about the sociological perspective, so we have charismatic people that come along, bring some juice and excitement. We then have that routinized where people start putting a frame around it, and just hope that every now and again the magic surges. Why then do the very people that set up the institution and the structure to hopefully have these wonderful moments arise again, why do they then almost turn to a focus of suppressing the charismatic people that rise up? Why does that happen?
I don't think they do, but I think it's a generational passing of the baton that the founding charisma, they become subject to manipulation by subsequent generations, and their story is haphazard. because their life experience is charismatic, which is haphazard. So we have to standardize it. We've got to have the wise men come in at this point, the shepherds arrive here, we've got to have the journey down to Egypt, we've got to have the story which nobody really knew who had the right version, because we all participated at different points in the story. Has to be standardized and regularized, or as George Richard,
They want to own the story.
Yeah, McDonaldized. It's got to be put into that format where it can be written up and passed on and handed down and so on and so forth. So that's how scripture itself developed, by the way. Yeah. So Holy Scriptures, even the Quran, there are at least 5 different versions of the Quran.
Right.
And you can't have 5 different versions if God dictated it.
Yeah.
So if God actually dictated it, which is the right one of the 5?
Yeah.
Somebody's got, some 4 of you have got
wrong.
not the dictated one.
Yeah.
But, so you get that problem of transgenerational inheritance or transference down through, and on. And so you get reactions against it. You get splits over what the prophet really meant. You get conflict over, does the charisma pass through genetic bloodlines, or does it come through some ordination system outside of the Holy Family, and so on and so forth. So, the idea of a papacy, of a pontiff who is charismatic successor all the way from Peter, is part of the genius, if you like, of the Catholic Church, because it says, here's one unbroken line of people. They got it stuffed up here and there, but hands-on all the way down to
the source.
Yeah, down to. Does that answer your bit?
Yeah, very well. And does that mean that to truly have a rebirthing of creativity and joy and inspiration from content that was originally joyous and inspirational, that there's always going to be tension and conflict?
I think so. Definitely.
For it to be rebirthed. Yeah, interesting.
Yeah. If you look at the charisma of pop music, right?
Yeah.
Nothing's happening in America till the black people arrive from Africa. And then, wow, it takes off. You get this thing called jazz and blues, and it transforms all that. And then that manages to get routinized. Louis Armstrong came out of a very routinized New Orleans jazz Dixie format.
Yes.
This is what jazz is.
Yeah.
And then there's a revolution against that.
Yeah.
So that by the time you get through the big bands, and then you get into the bebop of the 20th century, boy, something's going to, and then that has to change too.
Yeah.
Because music, like religious experience, is one single ecstatic experience.
Yeah.
I went to the club, I heard Dizzy Gillespie play this, or I think Lowell, we went to the Newcastle Workers Club in 1971, and Dizzy was there with his jazz
and Thelonious Monk.
Mind blowing! Whoa, get out of here,
Peter!
Amazing!
What a privilege that was.
Yeah, yeah.
But then the Beatles turned up in the early '60s, totally out of the ballpark. Elvis is completely routinized.
Yes.
Nobody's going to see his films anymore.
No.
He's churning out this horrible pop under Colonel Tom Parker's supervision with RCA Records. Where's the energy going to come from? And it always has to come from somewhere.
Yes.
At the moment, it's coming out of the charismatic Pentecostal churches. But it had to come from somewhere. And I was just, privileged. I still thank God, because I'm still very devout, that I was roped in this period we're talking about.
This perfect storm of creativity and tension. Can we?
After Persecution Games, I started writing for business.
Can you
So I
just
became
quickly tell us a bit
ghostwriter,
more
and I did
about,
all this
hey,
stuff. But
Lowell, just before
yeah.
you keep going there, sorry to interrupt, can you just tell us a little bit more about Persecution Games? Because that became an actual album,
Yeah.
didn't it?
Can I come back to that? I just want to
Sure,
make a short point. So
Yes, sure.
everything Robert has said, I could see in the business thing that I was.
I see.
So the same sociology of leadership and bureaucrat and traditional leadership, charismatic leadership, I could see exactly what was happening in the church, happening in in business.
Yeah. Yes. So it's not just a church or a religion problem, it's a human
Right.
problem.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, yeah, you're on it. Peter Lowell wrote a song called Wagner and Jones.
Yes, love that song.
Who writes a song called Wagner and Jones? Who writes a song about two obscure Adventist charismatics
From the late 1800s.
from the late 1800s? But it's one of my favorites
It's a
because
great song.
it's
Yeah.
just something about those words where Lowell, well, you know it, Lowell. It's about you got to do this when you're young. Lowell saw that back when
Wow.
we were young,
Yes.
and
Yes.
it sounds like an old man reflecting on his life. What's the line, Lowell?
Ain't it hard when you're young and nobody wants to listen, even though you've got a story to tell?
Wow.
Yeah, I love it.
We were living that, Peter. I heard those, and I never wrote that song. That's a Lowell original, full music and
music as
words.
well. Oh, really?
Yeah.
Because that's on
that's a
All My
Lowell.
Friends Are Sinners, isn't it?
Correct. Sally does a beautiful
on this
version
one.
of it there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a great song. I mean, these, like, if you want to find out a really incredible version of the Adventist gospel from this time period, these two albums, every piece of music and every lyric is just gems and gems and gems, a gold mine. Okay, well, just you mentioned Sally there. Where's Sally? I know Kevin Hilder often watches. That's her brother. He often watches the show. Where's Sally Hilder?
I don't really know much since you and I got together with her, Robert, 7 years ago or 6 years ago.
2014.
Trained, she's a special needs teacher, and she's got a couple of kids. One of them, I think, his IQ's through the roof. ADHD, whatever the thing is, and I guess she's doing all right. But we love seeing her.
This was at the reunion you had, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yes, thank you, Peter.
And Genner was involved with that, wasn't he? And he's in the picture on the back.
Well, he was
there.
the marketing and the business side.
There's the three of you on the back cover.
Yeah.
Genner up the top, I guess my top right.
Yeah.
So just back to this charismatic kind of vibe. You guys had this charismatic leadership. In many ways, your message, the music was suppressed, kicked out. My generation came along, tried to continue and carry the flame, but we were even more suppressed because by then Ford had been kicked out. There was a real move in the 80s to suppress anything that was a bit lively and a little bit righteous by faith, gospel oriented, which is sad. So you guys kind of dropped out for a while there, and my generation had no mentors. How important is it for when something is routinized to have a thread of the charismatic creatives rolling on and keeping the baton passed from one to the other? Like, I imagine that's pretty important.
Well, Ford, to me, sorry, Lowell, did you want to say something?
No, you
I'll just start off with Ford, to me, Peter, because he was the charismat par excellence. I don't think I'll ever see another Adventist teacher, preacher. Oh, okay.
See, he walked the talk. He really
walked the talk.
Yeah.
I'll be back in a minute.
Yep, no worries.
Yeah.
Yeah, he walked the talk. You're about to say there, Lowell.
Yeah. So that was one of the things that I thought was really well. I've ghosted books, as I said, you know, on time management and all these things, self-improvement stuff. A lot of it's crap. I've ghosted it anyway. But
Put food on the table.
I hung out with these people, you know, that I was ghosting for, that had a message to tell people how to do, you know, do their day or get up and positive thinking. And so I was with them when they were drinking too much at night, and I could see they were saying, you know, those business speakers, they were saying what they were saying, but privately they were living
totally different lives.
Yeah. And Ford, who I got to know a little bit, he wasn't like that. He was through and through.
Yes.
I've been with him to restaurants and seen him eating carob or something. You know, it was it was all real. And plus he had this theological content which I thought was significant. Because see, Robert in Melbourne, he was with some very thoughtful people, Jim Johansson, and they were like intellectual. They read Calvin's Institutes and Buchanan's Justification by Faith, Martin Luther, you know, the Gospel in Galatians. They read all that. I was in Sydney, which is much more pop. You know, it was the Domain, the Salt, the film you saw, you know, Sunshine, and so on. And I was going to non-Adventist but still Christian coffee shops and Liberation Gospel and anti-developers. Jack Mundy had turned up, and you know, I was doing all of this other stuff. But Ford actually had that little niche of that depth and that gospel, which I don't. Not that I'm interested in the Christian faith at the moment, but it's not there now. You know, I went to one of those.
He had a thread of this thing that we're talking about that kept moving through the church at the time. So kicking him out did the church a great disservice.
I was furious.
Yeah.
I mean, the minute it happened, you talk about persecution games. The minute it happened, Robbie and I just resigned on the spot.
Wow.
We didn't stop going. We wrote a letter of resignation. I wrote to the General Conference president to tell him what an arsehole he was, and wrote a song, Bureaucracy Blues.
Yeah,
which
great song.
I'm so glad that Robert bit into that one and made it into a kind of a fury on persecution.
It's a very powerful
let's get rid
album.
of Desmond and all that. I just wanted everyone to know how angry I was.
Yeah. We're talking about how the threat of Des Ford was a positive thing, and when he was kicked out, it's never been resurrected within the Adventist Church. And here's 40 plus years where I feel so sad at times that these incredible creatives just left, and what a sad loss to the Adventist Church.
It's a blow. It's a real blow that I don't think
Just
the
gonna
church
get
has ever
water.
recovered from, Peter. Sorry, I had to run off to get the TV repairman organised.
That's fine. We're tag teaming.
The loss of Des was like, it just capped off, you know, my pessimistic expectation and my fears that I did not belong to a congregation of people who were as enthusiastic about things as I was.
Yeah.
You know, I had no inkling that my church was so judgmental.
Yeah.
Until I was at Strathfield Adventist High School, and there were two boys.
What year was this?
In Lowell's year, I think. This is about 65, 66.
Okay. Yeah.
Right in the middle of you know, the 60s is just booming.
Starting, yeah.
And these two students, I won't mention their names, but I can still see their faces. They were distributing literature to students during free time at school.
Mm.
And then the next thing I knew, they were kicked out. And I remember asking somebody, why did they? Oh, it's to do with that. That's Brinsmead literature.
Right. So
I
they get
said,
kicked
what?
out of school for
For
sharing
distributing
ideas.
for sharing ideas.
So that's
And
fascism.
I was, as naive as anything. I'm a young, not long out of Fiji,
Yeah.
13, 14-year-old.
Yeah.
And here's this first encounter that shocked me.
Yes,
That
with this judgment.
well, what was in the literature?
Yeah.
Oh, it's heresy. What's
Yeah.
heresy?
Wow.
And so it wasn't. When I ran into Rosemary Taylor, that was the next real
Yeah.
time I understood that what the church had done to Brinsmead and all the so-called awakeners.
Yes. Yeah.
And then,
Badly treated.
Then of course, by the time the sociology of religion made its impact on me at the end of the 70s,
Yeah.
I began to understand. I see this isn't about freedom; it's about management.
Yes.
It's about organization. It's about discipline. It's about judgmental punishment and all those things that I had questions about discussing with Lowell and others. And of course, when the Ford thing, and of course with Brinsmead, I'd become friends by then, by the end of the 70s, and I'd written up a couple of papers on his awakening movement, which helped me understand. I'd also done a dissertation in my undergraduate degree on what I call the Baronia Breakaway Church, BBC, here in Melbourne, which was one of the first group of Adventist young people, mostly street preachers, who, following the demise of gospel preachers like Adrian Jones and Jim Johansson and of course Brinsmead, Ford in 79, 80, and they decided at the end of 79 they were going to, or the beginning of 79.
Yeah.
Anyway, I've forgotten exactly what
Yeah.
year that was. Might have been earlier. Might have been 77. They
No,
decided
79, I think they kicked out Ford.
79,
I'm pretty sure, yeah.
So
80.
I was in Bermagui.
Lowell's doing his edges, and I'm, finishing my bachelor's, and Ford hit. It was like there was a double whammy because there was the Chamberlains, and there was Ford, all happening around the same time, 1980.
Yes, that's right.
1980. What a year!
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Incredible. Yeah.
Well, and go ahead.
No, you finish. I shouldn't have interrupted.
No, that's all I was going to say. That I don't think
Well,
I'll ever
Persecution
hear.
Games, you've got, on one side you've got Songs of Innocence. Well, sides. My daughter Zoe laughs at me. You're talking about sides in an era of CDs. I don't think so, Dad. But
Yeah, there it is.
One side was like the Songs of Innocence, and then the others are Songs of Experience. And then I was beginning to see, and this is partly because of Martin and Tiny and so on, that you've got that gospel thing happening in The Fire at Luna Park. You've got and also in Tiny Tim, and then in the Chamberlains, leading to crucifixion and, the persecution and, in Luna Park, the 6 children died and 1 adult. And the man's name was John Godson, Godson.
Even the name.
And then with the Chamberlains, there was, the dingo spirit, Kilpunya, which is like a satanic spirit. And so
there was all these symbols
exploring from a lot of different sources, which are reflected on the crazy cover.
Can you hold that cover up again, Bob?
Yeah, sure.
I was looking. I call it the trilogy. I was looking for my copy of it, and it's somewhere here in the
See,
shed.
Martin did that.
Yeah, so
You know,
Martin,
the same guy who did
Martin
Eric
Sharp.
Clapton. Yeah,
Yeah.
he did
Yeah.
Eric Clapton's cover and our cover.
Yeah, amazing.
And Robert's got the original of that.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
Hey, just what you were saying earlier there, I was talking to a lady this week who's been watching this series. What's that? Wow.
Rolling Stone magazine with Lowell's story on the Chamberlains and the cover story.
Wow.
I mean,
Far out.
you know, what an achievement. But that was the era, Peter.
You made it to the cover of Rolling Stone.
Yeah, cover of Rolling Stone. This was the
It was
March
amazing, yeah.
1984. No. Anyway, I need my glasses.
Persecution
April
goes for about
84.
7 years.
April 84.
Yeah. So it started.
When did it come
with
out?
The Ford thing came out in 85.
Oh wow.
Persecution Games.
Yeah.
So Robert had plenty of time to think about it in the studio.
Yeah.
And also these other influences were coming in. Hence, you know, the Salvation Army and the Loonigs and the Tiny Tim and Martin, all that collage. And the artwork, by that time Carl Needham did a wonderful kind of almost corporate job on the artwork for the first two. But by the time Persecution Games came around, I was becoming influenced by artists like Jamie Reed, you know, who were the punk artists who did the Sex Pistols cover. So I was looking at cutouts, and that's why the Galilee logo is such a mess.
Yeah.
Because I wanted it to be the opposite.
Changed it.
Yeah, wonderful.
And the music is a departure from the first two albums. So it's a very different kind of music too. It's matching the mood of the content of your lyrics and your feeling. It's I don't mean abrasive in a bad way. It's a challenging confronting. Yes, that's the word. Yeah. Hey, go ahead. Which is what you were aiming for, or
yeah. So I got a different band, great mate Neil Farnell, may rest in peace, and it started doing gigs with guesting gigs with him because he liked my songs, and he came to me through some of the street preachers, Greg Hughes and Colin Mack, who are both musos and songwriters, budding songwriters, and they said, you know, Bob, these new songs that you've got, let's get rid of Desmond, Bureaucracy, Blues, the Cult, so on and so forth. You got to hear what Neil's ideas for them. Oh, okay. So they invited me to I was not expecting this, but I'd left a cassette of my acoustic thing with them, of renditions of the song, and Neil had, you know, come into the scene, and he was a very young, energetic blues guitarist, and he took them and he basically arranged them with my finessing and permission, because he said, oh, how about this feel for this song, you know?
Yeah.
I want to join the Cults. Yeah, that works for that.
Yeah,
it's, you know, because he arranged it for his band of musos, and
which was the side, the experience.
Yeah.
So the Innocence was more Mick Reed's gentler band, and then Neil, he was just perfect for side B.
Yes.
You just let off the cork.
Yes.
And I was so glad. I was saying, Robert, I was so glad that you really bit into the Bureaucracy blues. You know, don't say I ever loved you. I mean, that is a vicious thing to say to anyone.
Yeah,
and that's what I'm saying to the Adventist Church.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. Okay, Bob, can you just hold up your Persecution Games again if you've got it there? I just want to hold up the three. Now, Dale Willis, in conjunction with the Media Centre, remastered and I think even remixed the
Yes.
Refugee album.
Yeah.
And he's done a great job, hasn't he?
See the dingo?
In the
Awesome.
cover. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
See the
These
little dingo?
figures,
Yeah.
without his involvement.
Yeah.
And
If
all along the way, Peter, we've just been blessed by having
Different people that
who
are
understood the
contributing.
spirit of what we were wanting to do
Yeah.
and got involved. You know,
Yeah.
we didn't have any money. You know, we did Sally's album on $1,500.
Yeah. Yeah.
$1,500
Yeah.
from start to go. You know, just because the musos were enthusiastic.
Yeah.
We did all three of them like that. Actually,
Yeah.
you know, Genna was there to help us cover costs. You know, and made sure people got paid, but we had to fundraise most of it
To make
from
it happen.
the street preaching community. Yeah,
Yeah.
here
Yeah.
in Melbourne, and you know, quite a few interested parents who wanted to support the work we were doing, and
Yeah. It's a
and people
powerful
just
cover.
yeah.
Just looking at it as you talk there. Yeah, that's great, Bob. It means that people capture the vision. They want to get involved.
Yeah.
Well, you'll
Yeah.
see the same dingo. Martin did a huge tapestry for the New South Wales Mitchell Library.
Yeah.
And when they got it up, which is where you walk in, you'll see that same dingo there.
Right.
So Martin got into the Chamberlain thing,
Yeah.
and that became part of his arsenal of iconic images. The Southern Cross and, you know, Al Jolson and Tiny Tim and the dingo.
Yeah, see this feeling that you guys had that then was poured into this album, and Bob, when you just nipped out there for a second, Lowell was saying that when Ford was kicked out, you immediately went and resigned from the church, took your names off the roll at the time.
Sure.
Tell us a little bit about how you felt about doing that, like sitting there and acting out in this like a more than just words. You practiced what you preached. You know, you acted on it. You didn't just say we're upset. You went, we're out of here. At that time, what kind of things were going through your head, Bob, when you were both doing that?
Well, I never did that. I took a moratorium.
Right.
I respected everybody who was doing that, and I just thought this can't be a permanent condition,
Right.
of the remnant church.
Right.
It's a fever. It's an acute illness. Can't be endemic.
Right.
But it looks like it is endemic, Peter. And the older I get, I'm becoming more cynical about the possibility of things being any different. It was as if the church said, "You're too much for us, Des. We can't handle you. We just want to be our own little club, quietly becoming perfect in our little sanctification circles.
Yeah.
And once we've got the latter rain, it's goodbye, buddy. We're out of here. We're going to get, raptured at the second coming. And unfortunately, all you dudes are going to get left behind." And it was ridiculous, It was utterly appalling, To quote Pope Francis recently, who am I to judge anybody about what sets them alight and where happiness comes from in their purview of the human experience? We have no right to cut people down in a journey that and here was Des, this mighty, tree in the forest of Adventism. And it was like Bob's story, Brinsmead's story, all over again.
Yeah.
And I Lowell told me I still have his correspondence from that era. I should have dug it out of explaining why he was doing what he was going to do, and his letter to Parmenter, I think, Lowell, Parmenter.
Yeah, that got published I think it was to the GC president in America.
Right.
Neil
That
Wilson.
might be at the back of Edges. But I was
I
furious.
took a holiday, Peter, and
Yeah.
just sat it out until I felt, you know, I may never have gone back to church if our son Chone hadn't died. And Lowell will know about this. In 1994, Australia
Sad.
Day, 1994, next year will be the 30th anniversary of his death. But my second wife, Lupe, and I, we suffered hell through that
cool.
experience.
Yeah.
And I said to her, we're not going to go to church unless you want to go to church for the sake of going to church. We're not running to the city of refuge
No.
to find a resolution to our grief.
No.
We're going to tough this grief out. And I don't want you to confuse getting over grief with spirituality or the reason to go to church.
No.
After 6 months, she said to me, I'm ready to go to church. I said, which church? I said, I can only go to one church. I can only fellowship in one church. That's the church I know, even though I'd thought about joining the Catholics seriously. And she said, because that's where she had come from, and she said, well, I'll go to your church. And we were in Frankston, and I said, all right, I'll look it up. There was no Google back then. And we looked it up in the phone book, gave the number a call, Pastor so-and-so is this church, and blah, blah. We went along one Sabbath, and she met wonderful people, and they still are around, still our dear friends, who didn't, who weren't interested in judging us for what we did or where we'd come from. And there was one issue which I had to stare down, and that was the issue of Carver, and I had to go before the church board and explain why this health drink is actually good for you. And here's the science, and it has no alcohol, just in case that's what your main concern was, and take them step by step through the science of Carver and point out that it's a medicine in many relaxing drugs that are prescription available and also available off the shelf in chemist shops. It's just not prepared in the tradition of a bowl in coconut shell cups. But apart from that, that's where we've stayed. I haven't journeyed past that occasional.
Did you find solace in the ritual and also then found community of supporting people?
Not really. I found solace. I didn't need to go to church to find solace for any
more
reason.
The people.
To be an
It's more the
Adventist.
people.
It was just the social gathering of. I wrote about this, Peter, in a book that John Ashton produced called, I can't remember the name of it, but it was subtitled 50 Scientists Say Why They Are Christian. And I wrote a chapter for that book. He had chemists and biologists and geneticists and who were of Christian background from all around the world, or Australia largely. And I was the sociologist. And I'm happy with happy people. And I don't care who they are, whether they're atheists or Satanists or whatever they are. Miserable people turn me off. Miserable people, miserable Christians. Oh, just the worst kind, For goodness sake, what have you got to complain about? And most of the Christians I know are middle-class people living accumulative lives of material gain and wealth, and they're miserable. What? you can't be miserable with the gospel, Peter, is
Yeah.
what I found.
Yeah.
You can't be miserable with that.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
you know, that was my reaction. That's why it never made a difference to Lowell or to me, whether he became a Freemason or I became an Adventist again. We had a lively exchange at the time, mind you, and I've still got those wonderful emails and letters, all asking me, why are you going back to church? And me, why have you become a Freemason? And so we had a real ding-dong there with Genna standing on the sidelines adjudicating, and I've got his emails as well, So if you're a happy person, I'm your friend.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I did a gig with Neil and the band at the a few pub gigs, and Neil's patron were the Hells Angels, so
Wow.
they were the Hells Angels bikie band, and I met Ball Bearing at one of the gigs. In fact, he confronted me. Yo, Bob, gave me a big embrace, and I did. I was scared. I had no idea how to behave in front of these dudes. They were. Well, that's another story. But anyway, they were happy.
Yeah. You're finding
feel.
people that want to make the most of this short life we're given. Yeah. Yeah.
What can we say, Peter? What can we do?
Can I had a great chat with Cal Stewart. I think he was the first in this little series, and this is number 3. He was talking about this reunion, and you'd kind of gotten into his ear there, Bob, and said, hey, look, a lot of these people are kind of starting to reach the end of the mortal coil. Might be a good idea to gather them together. Tell us a little bit about that exchange, and did you hear back reports from the reunion? By all accounts, those that went had a great time, and Cal did a great job and enjoyed it as well. Tell us a bit of your thoughts on the recent reunion.
I did. I encouraged him and gave him lots of feedback when he was thinking about how it should proceed, and I was hoping to attend, but I said to him right at the word go, Cal, I can't speak at this, so please don't dob me in for a speaking role. I would become too emotional.
Right.
And I do get too emotional when I talk about the hurt that led to the exit of so many dear friends, and the long-term injury that institutionalized actors can inflict on people who just want to have a good time. Come on.
Seemingly without care for the ramifications of that, and for no worries that we've lost generations of creatives.
How can you be a real leader, a shepherd of the flock, with that sort of attitude? We got to go and find that one lost sheep.
Yeah.
How does that square with? Yeah. Oh, it doesn't matter. We can lose 144,000 if we have to.
Yeah.
Well,
I think there's a famous. There's a famous. Gillian Ford mentioned to me. Someone said we don't care if we lose. I think 70,000 of these kind of people, as long as we keep Adventism pure. I'm paraphrasing.
No, so long as we keep in control.
Keep in control, yes,
and
that's
we
true.
And we get paid. We get 10%. And does it matter that you get 10% off a creative person? You get more money out of it.
It's true, actually. Financially, they do better.
So you can just lose them,
Yeah. Hey, Bob, I got a message, and I think this may refer to the BBC thing you chatted before.
Yeah.
Jean Bedford wrote to me. She's 89 now. She wrote after the Cal Stewart interview, and she said there was a big breakaway which we were a part of. She says about 200 of us started our own weekly Sabbath services in the Ringwood Salvation Army Church.
Correct.
And she's going to be on the program as well later, which will be really great.
I spoke there one Sabbath, and I still have the program, Peter. I'm a collector, an archivist. They were called the Eastern Hills Gospel Fellowship.
Right.
And I'm glad you've mentioned her name, because she would be a fascinating person to speak to.
Yeah.
David Stokes was in there, the Box, Gordon and Val Box.
And to have 200 people break away and start something, that's incredible for such a small church.
Yeah.
Can we share some more thoughts? So that's going to be a fascinating conversation. Can you share some thoughts on what was it about the theology of Jim Joey, where he seemed to capture the essence of joy of the gospel, the young people. People have said he went away for some retreat or workshop or something and came back a bit more fired up on the gospel. What kind of theology was he teaching that was gospel but also Adventist kind of related?
He would go through the book of Romans, for instance, and preach from the text what it meant, and it was exegetical, homiletical. It was analyzing the scripture, exegesis, homilies. This is what this means or should mean in your sanctification or in your life as a Christian experience. So he always tied and concretized it in a way that, it just sat well. It just
and brought it into everyday life by the sounds.
We could see it. Yeah, he wasn't a big on the Hebrew or the parsing the Greek or whatever it was.
2,300 days.
Could do that. He could do that.
Yeah.
And occasionally he'd drop that in his sermon, but he was a pastoral person who made the gospel come alive. Because I put it down to his musical sort of instinct that he preached well because he was a good muso.
He loved jazz, didn't he? Yeah.
And we reconnected after a long gap. From the 70s. In the 90s, he came, sought me out when I was lecturing at Monash, and asked if he could quietly attend my lectures on the side in the sociology of religion, so I could bring him up to speed with the literature in that field, because he wanted to do a doctorate on some topic in possibly the sociology, stroke psychology, stroke philosophy of religion. He wasn't sure which one he wanted. So I had him in his last years as a student, sitting up the back, smirking at things I'd say and correcting me if I got stuff wrong, which I loved. And then after class, it was that particular semester he attended, it was an evening class. After class, we'd go home and we'd sit down and play music. So I really got to love Jim at the end there.
And sadly, he died at only 58, I think he was, when that Kenton was saying. And what I want to keep coming back to is, yes, we can look at the tragedy of the end. We can look at the persecution games. We can look at the shameful way people were just treated. But again, when I grasp this little gem of the gospel there that you guys were sharing, the joy of it, even at its basic level of bringing it back to how you can have a better life, practically, that still stands on its own. And that's what I want this little mini series to highlight, that, these other things are important to acknowledge, the the tearing down, the shameful actions, but we can still uplift and highlight this goodness that came from it as well, the good news that came from it. So I'm hoping we can keep on that. So we've talked about Jim, just a bit more about Peter McDougall. Chair, what were some of the things, because he would do some public speaking, I guess, and Lowell, if you can also share a little bit about the few times that you went to East Prahran, some of your memories of that as well. Sorry, Rob, you go.
I worked for 3 years for Peter, helping build his rock house. I don't know whether you've ever seen it.
No.
But if you're ever in Melbourne and you want to see something interesting as far as a domicile habitat goes, I'd be happy to ask Jenny if we could take you up there just to have a look at his rock house. But I worked for 3 years full time on that, and Peter and I would talk all day, every day, and Harry Ballas would join us during college vacations. And sometimes Lowell's brother-in-law would turn up to work casually. He was an employer of lots of casual labourers. He was helping students get through their high school or college, and they needed cash in hand jobs. He was one of those, and they were good-hearted Adventist employers around at that time. So we discussed a lot of stuff, and he was a big Des Ford man. So he used to call him Dizzy Des. Dizzy Des says this, Bob, what do you think? And because he knew I was a reader of Reformation literature, and I was in my own, library trying to build it up and read all the greats. Calvin wasn't a fan of popular culture either, as you know.
Yeah.
He banned lots of good stuff.
He not only banned, I think he killed a few people, didn't he?
Yeah. It was a crime to watch dancing. It was a crime to dance, but it's also a crime to watch dancing.
It. Yeah.
So we discussed lots of things, and Peter had the joy of the gospel, and he turned the street preaching group that came to his Bible studies when he was living at Rowville first on with insights. They were called insights, and we went to Weekly Road in wherever that suburb is, in Bentley, East Bentley, on other nights, and the group would go to somebody else's place. Barry Smith, who had been a pop singer in the 60s, had one in his St Kilda place. And there was just the buzz, Peter. There was the early 70s. We were all, what have you discovered? What's your insight into this text? Peter had a great insight into Romans chapter 10, verse 9. That became the standard for his contribution to the whole thing. So if you go to that text and you read it, that was Peter McDougall. That's what he preached on in his Bible study, through obvious other stories and so on and so forth. But that's where we came back to. And the street preachers really responded to that. And the thing too, Peter, that it was so joyful. I mean, Lowell will know this. It was joyful. If you tell people good news, it really is something they celebrate. You can't physically hide it.
Yeah.
I remember telling my wife she was let off the hook for her past sins. She said, "What do you mean?" I said, "Well, it works this way." And half an hour later, she was, "Wow, oh, that's fantastic! No, how come nobody's ever told me that?"
Yeah.
I said, "That's how I responded."
Yeah.
That's how everybody responds when they hear the gospel.
It's joyous. Have you heard the news? You've been set free. Yeah.
Yes, my gosh.
Yeah.
What a declaration to make to the universe. And
and we're celebrating.
You're not talking enough, Lowell. Come on.
We're celebrating a joyous era. So, Lowell, some memories of East Prahran. How do you say it? Prahran?
Prahran, yeah.
Prahran, yeah.
He said Prahran,
See, I was just there in and out for a year. And so everything Robert said, I was there for a little bit, and I agree with everything he said. But I was in Sydney, and it was a different kind of thing.
Yeah.
It wasn't as heady, you know. It didn't have all that theology. We did a musical. Again, my cousin Stuart turns up, and Jonah, which was a stage show with songs. And I remember I'd written it in Warrigal. I was writing half-hour plays for my classes, you know. I was a teacher then. And then I wanted to do more with it when I went to Sydney. And I asked Robert, you know, because I couldn't get Robert to write music because he was in Melbourne. And I asked him to make a suggestion. He suggested Cal Stewart. I said, yeah, but he lives in Melbourne too. How does that?
Yeah.
And then he suggested Lester, and so did my wife, Robbie. So we did that. And my cousin Stuart was in there, and he was a very stable influence on me, because I was kind of a teacher, and 2/3 of them were my class, so they couldn't tell me what to do. But we put that gospel message in there, and that's where Father in Heaven comes in.
Yeah, I love that song.
Oh, that's the most beautiful song. The most beautiful song.
Yeah.
So that was a stage experience, if you like.
Yeah.
And we, you know, got into trouble and all that sort of stuff. Julian Cook, I was in the English staff room, and, you know, John Eager,
Oh, yeah.
Lester Lemke, all that gospel stuff. We all got sort of weeded out. And I felt by the end of 1978 that I was going to get the boot, you know, really, if I stayed there. And so I just took off. And then finally, because they were talking about we'd have to sign a document of beliefs. That was, I don't know if they did in Melbourne. And so the whole Seventh-day Adventist thing was, but I was never, in a way, a Seventh-day Adventist in that sense.
No.
You know, because I spent my teenage years, you know, lying that I was in church, and I'd go to these rock shows.
Yeah.
You know, Saturday afternoon at the Star Club, and then Sydney Stadium at night. And my parents, my mum was born in Mauritius, and so she spoke a lot of French. So she didn't quite know what was going on. So she'd say, "Where are you going? You're not going to a dance, are you?" I'd say, "Oh, no, I'm going to a disco." And she didn't know what that was. So she said, "Oh, that's good. You're not going to a dance." So
That's lucky.
So,
Calvin would be happy.
and then this gospel thing came up, which sort of interested me after, because I got expelled from Avondale and all that stuff.
Avondale College.
Yeah. So 1970,
Yeah.
I was expelled, and that was when I met Martin and went to the Yellow House and all those exotic domain, all that sort of stuff. But I was expelled for writing poetry, and
Amazing.
then came back, and that was when Robert came. And I didn't want to get expelled the second time.
Yeah.
Even though I was trying pretty hard, because I had that motorbike stashed, and you weren't allowed to have a vehicle. And that was how I went to those poetry readings. And Robert was on the back of the motorbike, and we slept the night in the streets in Hunter Street.
We did, on top of garbage bags.
Oh, my goodness.
Bags full of garbage in our duffel coats. We had no money. We couldn't get back to college. But, you know, when you talk about the hobo, you know, all that sort of stuff that the American beat poets were romanticizing.
Yeah.
Hell, Lowell and I were living that, Peter. We were hitchhiking everywhere. We, you know, I could fill a book of hitchhiking stories. I mean, wow, you know, and that's road experience.
Yeah. You were living that whole alternative lifestyle, really. And it sounds
but
like
not
that
deliberately.
No, right, yeah.
Not deliberately.
And Lowell, your kind of path was more down the Martin Sharp, Tiny Tim, the creative artists and poets, and there's Freedom. Now, you,
So
That-
I didn't
That's the
have a
actual
problem.
booklet we gave out to the people who attended, Peter. It's the
Right.
libretto in there, and
right.
just a beautiful little publication. Lowell, I don't know who designed this logo for us, but somebody important did.
I can't see because the screen's frozen. But
Gone again. Oh no, you're gone frozen again.
is it the three crosses?
Yes.
Yeah,
Might have
looking out
been
through the
Jeff Judd, someone like that.
Sydney scene. You know, you had Dave Wilmot's name up there before, Peter.
Yes.
I was
Not Jeff
terrified.
Judd, Bruce Judd. I think
Bruce Judd.
Right.
And he
I
wrote
was
a song
terrified
by
of Dave
Luther
Wilmot.
Play, yeah.
Yeah, were you?
So when they
play.
sacked Des, I didn't really have a problem just walking out of the church
No.
and turning my back on it and going straight to the pub. You know, it was just I was as angry with myself as, you know, to think that I got sucked in.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
and I actually had that idealism and joy, if you like, Robert, you know, for those 5 years, or, you know, from 82 to 78. And
Yeah.
I was quite angry with myself. You know, I'd missed out on all this
Other stuff. Yeah.
other stuff, which I was
Yeah.
determined to catch up on, you know.
Yeah. I wish
And my
I'd
wife
left
was
earlier.
glad too that we left.
Yeah.
She was relieved, you know.
Yes, I bet. Hey, look, we'll wrap it up in a minute, but I'll just read some messages and comments that have been pouring in, and maybe get some of your reflections, and then we'll close with anything that you wanted to say that we may have missed. But it's the kind of thing, you know, it's we don't have to put a lid on it. I'm happy to try and find this joyous gem of the 70s gospel good news era and talk about it at other times as well. But let me just read a couple of things. Fleetwood wrote, I'll just bring it up. Having no religion at all is better than having bad religion, is a quote from Des Ford.
Yeah, good.
Now, this is by someone that you guys know, I think, P. John Williams.
Okay.
John Williams. I was influenced by these guys at Avondale, but didn't fully understand the essence of the gospel till building Peter Mack's house with Bob in Melbourne, the Bible study group, and attending East Paran, listening to Jim Joe. That's John.
Wonderful. Professor John Williams.
Yes.
From Western Australia.
Maybe John could be on the show as well. I think it some very good memories there too. Luke wrote again, the institutionalization of the message is the chaining down of spirituality. It separates and segregates. It's the devil's greatest work. Yeah. Here's someone on YouTube's written so much hair.
That's Brian Caldwell. Brian.
Is that Brian?
That's Brian.
Oh, nice.
Very good. Very good.
Luke's written, hey, here's a promise. Don't wait until you're old. All your ideas will be broken. They won't be vigorous or so bold. Wagner and Jones. Yeah.
Great line.
I remember you teasing me, Robert, about putting the word vigorous into a song. Vigorous or so bold. It's such a...
Fleetwood has written protest music.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'll find out who wrote this. This is, I think this is Cal writing with Yvonne Stewart there. Robert, it is the futility of a works emphasis that is so prevalent in Adventism, was all of a sudden with the coming of Des Ford turned on its head. At least in my lifetime, the beauty of the gospel was understood and embraced. Des changed. Where's that gone? Des changed our lives. Cal Stewart.
Amen.
Yeah.
I have the Millers to thank, Wayne and Jenny Miller.
Interesting. Yeah. Luke's parents.
For for bringing me into Des's thought more
Right.
during 3 years of truck driving for the Hopkins family here in Melbourne.
Mm.
Wayne and Jenny were the distributors of those hot Des tapes that were
Really?
so
Oh.
controversial in the 70s. Everything went out through cassette tapes
Yeah.
or
So they were quite
photocopied.
intentional and organised at doing that.
Yeah, I'd swap a tape every week almost, or I listened to them in my truck as I would
It's right.
plowing along the highway to West Wyalong or
Yeah.
out to wherever I was, and it soaked in at that stage.
Yeah.
Well, in
And that-
Persecution Games, there's a song called Ruling Class.
Right.
And then the second verse, look at me, Jesus, I'm a trucking man.
Yeah.
That's right.
Which is, I wrote those words for Robert.
Yeah.
Right.
Obviously, and I was working as a fisherman then, so that explains that bit. And
I thought-
my wife was building the house,
Yeah,
I'd like to
that's
say,
right.
Peter, is Robert and I are still writing together.
That's
So,
great. Yeah, you mentioned off air that there's a song you've just written together in the last day, is it, or a couple of days even?
That's right.
I think the thing is, and maybe what's a little bit different about us is because I'm not a Christian,
Yeah.
but I'm not an anti-Christian or not.
No.
I'm not anything. I'm just a blank.
Yeah.
And but I think the fact that religion is on the agenda, and so Robert's responding to that. So sometimes I come out with some things that are very negative, but it's still the subject is his subject, if you know what I mean. I don't know, Robert. I haven't run that one past you. You might have something to add to that.
Interesting.
But I do say some very. We don't write praise songs except one that Robert wrote on Sally's album. And some of the negative things, Lord, I Wish I'd Never Known, which is a Robert song. And then, of course, Questioning the Plan. That was what I wrote after Persecution Games. It was just like, but it was still that subject.
Is it possible that you guys could put out a book of all the lyrics that you've collaborated on, or that Lowell has written for you, Robert, that you've done the music? Be a fantastic read, because the lyrics are powerful.
It would.
Oh, well,
It is
get someone to do it.
Mm.
Do it and put it on Amazon, and I'll send files, and Robert and send these, and they can all. We need organising.
Yeah. That's right. Yeah, I need organising too.
And the thing the other thing too with
drives
Robert,
my wife mad.
What's that again?
The thing with Robert is when we're talking about that street preaching in Gosford, in Wyong, we'd strum up a beat, some nasty little rhythm, and Robert would just push me forward and he'd say, "You sing." So you've got Robert's a really good singer, and he's a reluctant singer, and I'm basically a shitty singer, and so that's why we got Sally. Robert was reluctant, I can't sing, and then we got Sally, but that wasn't enough for his people in Melbourne, because really what they wanted was a Robert Wolfgramm album.
Yeah, right.
Robert had sort of dodged it with me and come up with this other idea, which turned out to be a brilliant one, but at the same time we needed one from Robert, and then Robert did the Refugee album, which was
it's a great album.
Great music. It's great thing.
Yeah, it's a very good
And
album.
Martin's favourite song on that was Emmaus.
Yes.
9 miles from home. And because Martin would often at night, he'd sit up very, very late at night, smoking, and I was smoking too. And we'd sit up and just talk, and sometimes we'd talk about
and listen to gospel music,
religion, and it was those friends walking along the road that appealed to him. Robert was feeding right into something that Martin was identifying with, talking about. And when 2 or 3 are gathered together, he used to quote, Martin would quote, and that's how you come up with something.
Thank you, Lowell. We should never be ashamed of our journey, Peter.
No.
You know, with the street preachers, sometimes they'd be smoking before they came into the Bible study and have some great insights.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
and I never, we'd have to shrug
Yeah.
because the same, you know what, do you know what some sociologists call default to truth? Have you heard that expression?
Yes.
Default to truth.
Yeah.
It's
Defaulting to a thread.
yes, and it has its dangers because
Mm.
default to truth can also apply to preferring the one with the most status in the room.
Yes.
So the best default to truth story I know is the little boy who points out that the emperor has no clothes because everybody else has defaulted to status deference and whatnot.
Yeah.
Well, the street preachers, Peter, they were a bunch of people who had nothing to lose. They all had, some of them had savage, abusive journeys in families. Some of them had drug habits. But everybody wanted something to celebrate in life. And you know, they had no fear about calling out anything that wasn't gospel. I remember going to a church. I've forgotten which church it was. I don't think it was East Paran, but some preacher was in the pulpit because we used to raid churches.
Yeah.
You know,
You'd get all 40, 50 of your street preacher friends and followers.
At a Bible Insight during the week before, they'd say, where are we going this Sabbath? Oh, let's go to this one and just see what's happening there and see if we can rev it up a bit. So that was a deliberate strategy. So we'd go along. And if we heard stuff that was clearly, we felt anti-gospel and an insult, some of us would speak up. You know, I can remember Con Martin. He was bold as bold could be. Brother, I think you're preaching heresy there from the pews. And the poor preacher, you know, like even I would be shrinking, you know, I would be shy, but not Con.
Yeah.
And you'd say, oh my goodness, what's this? You know, well, that's not what the gospel says, you know, and people would be murmur.
Yeah,
but, you know, the emperor has no clothes. So
I remember Cal Stewart doing something like that.
Yeah, I can imagine. What's your memory of that, Lowell?
Sorry?
What's your memory of that?
Oh, it was East Paran Church, and we'd come from Warrigal, hoping for, you know, Jimmy Joe, and instead we had Pastor Utley, and I remember he was preaching, and he was doing what you were saying, you know, and then Cal Stewart just getting up and just storming out, and I went with him, you know, because I was looking for an excuse to avoid it, but I didn't storm out, but I was there with him, and he just looked at me and he said, "Smutskovich." Pastor Utley, Smutskovich.
Oh, that is gold.
I thought this is a good place to be.
Yeah.
What about the time we were jamming in the street, Lowell, and Pastor Don Self just came along and ripped out the power supply so no one could hear us?
That is incredible. Boy, that has happened a few times to other trying to be creative Adventist musicians.
Yeah, I can believe it, Peter. You've been there. You know what this is about, and it is to stop. You know, I'll go back to church holy when it stops. It's ridiculous. We're in a ridiculous world at the moment, you know. But, you know,
after all that stuff, you know, and I left the church, or we left the church. I mean, I seriously considered denying my Adventism because it was so uncool. You know, I was in Bermagui with fishermen, and some of them have done time, and you know, I mean, these were tough guys, and And then I just thought I should just pretend this never happened to me.
Mm.
And, never. And then it took a while, but then I thought, why deny my past? I did what I did. I
Yeah.
did those albums, and I don't mind talking to you, Peter, about
Yeah.
something that,
Here.
I mean, I could bury it and pretend I was never so silly as to be a Seventh-day Adventist, but maybe I wasn't. And maybe I was a gospel
It's
forward.
Oh, yeah,
thing,
yeah.
Because Ford was a great man.
I actually,
he just bloody was.
I feel that I'm a part of the Music Nation, and so when I left the Adventist Church, I feel like I still have my friends and the good memories of events and occurrences and your albums and all this kind of stuff. But I felt like the core me wasn't ever an Adventist, because at a very young age I was into the Beatles and Stones and Elvis and Hendrix, and that kind of saved me being part of a bigger community that was quite inclusive and accepting of whoever you were.
The great thing about churches, I think, looking back on the good instead of the bad, like pulling out the plug and all that sort of stuff when you're in the middle of a solo. But the good thing about it is it does encourage music.
It does.
It's
Yeah.
freedom.
Oh,
And
yeah.
up to Apocalypse Rider and all those things. I
Mm.
mean, what they've done is they've given Robert music halls, advisors, orchestras,
Yeah.
bands,
Amen.
halls, rehearsal halls, sound
Audiences.
systems, and
Audiences.
Yeah. They've done that whole thing.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
that is so good.
Yeah.
You know, Fijian. They're my Matangali, Peter.
Yes.
They're my clan. You
Yeah.
know, and love them or leave them. I won't, go there. But I get so frustrated with the the lack of progress on some fronts.
Yeah. But what is great is you can what I like about you guys is you're continuing on the flame of bringing joy to the world with music and creativity,
Thank you.
and you're
Thank you.
enjoying fellowship and community in your small church there at Frankston still, I think. And
Thank
what's
you.
great is that you can be concerned about the other stuff while also going, but I'm going to live a life that's still joyous.
Mm.
It's not breaking
Thank
you.
you.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah.
And
No.
I go to, we've got a local pub, the Family Hotel, and we do poets in the pub there.
Mm.
So,
Right. Yeah.
So that's my, my fellowship.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
a bunch of other guys, they're poets.
Yeah.
And, I read what I've written for Robert.
Yeah.
And we do that regularly. So, it's that's my fellowship.
And my fellowship's there's about 10 different cafes in a radius of 20 minutes of where I live. And I just
Wonderful.
every week I just find myself randomly catching up with people passing
Wonderful.
through or whatever. And so I
Awesome.
love it. Hey, I
Beautiful.
have absolutely enjoyed chatting with you guys. I'll bring up one more quick thing that Cal has written here. The Southeastern Melbourne Adventist Churches organised a youth camp at Ken Curran. Lynn Utley was the conference's official pastor for this camp, and he went ape when all the young people decided to shack up together instead of boys on the right and girls to the left. And by shack up, he's literally meaning instead of boys on the right, girls on the left. They just all sat together. I love it. Good memory.
Muscovich.
Bring the rebellion. Bring on the rebellion.
Yep, that's right. Good on you, Cal.
A quick plug for a program I'm going to be running every month in Toronto at a little place called The Hub. We're kicking off this Sabbath, 11:30 a.m. We've got a soup and buns and music and a conversation over the four Gospels. In the afternoon, we've got Eddie Hippolyte as our guest speaker at 2:00. And we're going to try and keep this idea of a joyful community based on common ground once a month. So those that are around this weekend, which is January the 21st, I think, come and join us.
Awesome.
as always, I've loved connecting with you guys even more than ever. I feel like it's a friendship that just grows and grows and builds, and I love it. So I really appreciate it. Any parting words from either of you before I hit the end button?
No,
Thank
good on
you.
you, Robert. We'll have to
Thank
keep
you.
talking about those new ideas you've
Yeah,
sent us, and
yeah, and
thank you,
hey,
and thank you, Peter.
oh, my
Yeah.
pleasure. And part of, I think, bringing joy is don't just hide it between the two of you. Do some live YouTubes. I mean, live to Facebook or YouTube, or let people hear it, and
Yeah.
do that book. Put out that book of
Yeah.
lyrics as well.
Yeah. This is my parting words. When I was at Avondale, even my close friends warned me away from two people, Robert Brinsmead and Lowell Tarling. And both of them ended up shaping my life in ways that are unbelievable.
Oh, I
And
love
I'm
it.
so grateful that God has allowed me to have these two friendships that have kept me in the channel, as it were,
Yeah.
And I know, Pete, I don't know whether you would say this is true of yourself, but I think I would have been dead of drugs if I had not discovered the gospel. I think I'm that sort of. It has to be a bit excessive and obsessive passionate about stuff that I get involved in, and I've never swayed or strayed from my commitment to the gospel, because I really believe in it as good news. It's
Yeah.
made my life worth living.
It edified your life.
Thanks to
Yeah,
Lowell, thanks to Lowell, and thanks to Robert.
Yeah, just on excess, you never actually understand anything until you get into that excess. But the other side of that is, just because you've done it doesn't mean you don't need to stay there. So I've done quite a few things, and I haven't stayed there.
No.
And I'm not sorry for
No.
anything that I've done in those ways.
Yeah.
Unless, if I've hurt someone, that's the only thing that I might regret, but not.
Yeah.
And I'm into trees, planting trees.
Yeah.
And that's my religion, trees.
A tree hugger. You're the tree, the free thinking tree hugger.
Fighting the council
only
to
joking.
get trees
Only
all the
joking.
way from Katoomba Station to Echo Point.
I love it.
We've
Yeah.
got the ugliest road, Lurline Street. And so I go to regular fellowships where we plot up and get federal funding, and
that's so good.
Beautify that, and
yeah,
I mean, pantheism in action.
Yes, the living temple.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Maybe SDA&A should become a publisher, and we'll republish the Living Temple. We'll publish lyrics and words of both your songs.
Okay.
So if anyone wants to support what I do, my PayPal's there if anyone would like to, and I promise that if you earmark it, I'm making a donation towards the Lowell and Bob lyrics songbook. I'll put it 100% to that. Hey, thanks, guys. We will leave it there, and awesome conversation. Thanks, everyone, for watching. We've had a great time, and until next time, we'll see you later.
Thank you.
Thanks, Peter.
Bye.